Okay, it is 6 o'clock. I will call the regular board meeting of April 11th to order. You do roll call.
Will do. Chairman Beecham.
Here.
Vice Chair Shraven. Here. Board Member Cadwalder.
Here.
Board Member Crawford.
Here.
And Board Member Founder.
Here.
All here.
Does anyone want these?
Approval of the agenda as presented. Any changes?
I'd like to request a small change to move the board training session to ahead of action items.
Okay,
Casey needs to leave after that presentation.
because he's got Little League practice or what?
He's got family obligations.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. We worked out the details.
Okay, with that change, I would entertain a motion to approve.
I'll approve of the change. Support it.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carried. Approval of the minutes as presented for the March 14th meeting. Entertain a motion.
I will motion to approve those. So moved.
It's been moved and supported,
Or it's supported, rather.
So supported.
seconded, supported, third, whatever.
Move further.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Public comment for items not on the agenda. Anything?
Nope.
Okay, we'll move on to action items.
Board training.
On board training.
Okay. And that's, I'm
We're gonna move that into the action item. I like it.
I'm saying that that's number 8.
So I have a question before we start this. So the camera's pointing at us, and you're giving us a presentation. Why isn't this camera pointing to the presentation so that people that do watch this can enjoy this presentation also? Can the camera be ever moved to this end of the table so that you can see the board members and the presentation?
Can we get drastic cuts between scenes and editing?
Split the screen. Well, I was thought that with the city of Lowell, because there's presentations that's happening that I can't be there, and I'd love to be able to see what's on that screen.
The problem we have while the camera's here is most of it's hard to, we don't have the full sound system. Like
Okay,
we had over there with microphones and everything, we looked into the cost of getting that stuff moved over here, it wasn't really all that feasible. So we keep the camera close to this end of the table where the majority of but I'm absolutely happy to look at moving it to someplace for a presentation, for moving it back here or something.
The battery will last.
Yeah, we just need to get it plugged in, so we can look at something.
that's, that's all. I just, I watch other city, meetings too, Cadillac, I look at Lansing, and they do have the presentation available, so. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Thank you for being flexible with schedule. Tonight what we're going to talk about is Lowell Light and Power's energy supply. So kind of the big question is, how do we power the town of Lowell? And there are a lot of details behind that question, a lot of questions behind the question. So hopefully by the end of the night, we'll be able to answer these questions here. Where is energy for Lowell generated? How much energy is generated at various locations? What fuel sources are used to generate that energy? How does energy consumption change throughout the year? And how will Lowell's energy change in the future? A lot of loaded questions, but we'll get through them all. Thank you.
I've got a bunch of them,
Yeah.
but I don't think you're gonna be able to answer them.
Could you go up one? All right.
but the way I did that, it goes page by page as soon as you scroll.
Perfect. All right, so I thought I'd start with physical location of the resources that we have ownership in. Now with energy, there's always a time component to it. And what I wanted to show is kind of where we're at in 2022 and where we're going in 2026. I picked 2026 because there will be a lot of changes by that point in time. This is a very loaded map here, so I'll just kind of explain it. Fuel source.
You're not gonna get it on TV yet.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
All right, I'll talk about that chart up there. Fuel source. Coal, I have shaded in gray. So anywhere you see the gray, that's a coal energy resource. Blue is natural gas. Orange is landfill gas. And with landfill gas, there are actually three or four different locations, but they're all in the general Flint area. Wind is green and solar is yellow. If you could jump back, sorry.
Yeah.
And just some notes. Point number 1, Campbell 3, to be retired in 2025, which is the large point on the west side. Point number 2, Bell River. They're actually going to be converting that facility from coal to natural gas. And in 2026, half the facility will be converted at that point. So I just kind of showed it as half coal, half natural gas. And 2023, actually, commission date is by the end of May of this year. So just a month and a half from now. Number 8 will be commissioned. And that's a new solar facility down in Calhoun County. And then in 2026, we're going to add a solar facility in Hart and another solar facility down in Calhoun. So next, sorry, go ahead.
With the closing of one in 2026, is there enough resources in 8, 9, and 10 to justify that and make up for that, or is that going to be in another next slide?
Oh, yeah, that will be in the next slide, but you brought up another good point though. The size of the circle is relative to the amount of energy we get from those resources. So our biggest resource for energy is that number 1 point, Campbell 3, the coal facility. Bell River is second, and then everything else is just relatively smaller, I'll say.
Does everything have a left head up to the right?
No, it does not.
So is Campbell plant
Good question.
completely, I mean, they're not doing any conversion on it, I mean, it's completely gone?
It's going right.
May of 25.
Yeah.
Yeah, May of
Is
25.
it May?
April
March
or
or May.
Early May?
Early 2025, it'll cease producing electricity for good.
Yes.
So there's no plans to repower that one. And that has been approved in the integrated resource plan that Consumers Energy submitted to the NPSC a couple years ago. It was in question while the integrated resource plan case was going through the Michigan Public Service Commission, but that has all been finalized and the plans are official at this point. But I think Casey highlights quite a bit of, like he said, this is such a loaded slide, and it captures a lot of there's a lot of changes that are being captured in this. One of them is the old school mentality, not the old school mentality, but the strategy that was utilized to secure power and why joint action agencies came about was to invest in large power plants. Economies of scale to buy into big units. So we had big and large chunks of our power supply coming from relatively few number of resources. You start looking, and if there was a hypothetical continued trajectory, there would be fewer and fewer big circles and more little circles. So it highlights the diversification. And if you went back 15 years previous to that, it'd be almost all coal and there would be very few investments. So it highlights this over time trend moving away. It also highlights diversification in the actual resources. Kalkaska is probably one of the oldest probably one of the older non-coal investments, and it's still a relatively new power plant. We're very dead on it. I don't remember exactly when that was commissioned, but there's a significant diversification in fuel mix and in the size of our investment in various projects.
Charlie, in order to get additional landfill gas, does the landfill actually have to close completely to offset getting that gas out of them, like number 5 is here?
I'm going to defer to Casey. He's got more knowledge on landfill gas than I'll probably ever have.
Spent a lot of time on landfills.
Okay.
Yeah, Casey.
Because I just know there's some pretty good ones around the area, I just don't know when they could start becoming a energy source.
You talk from
Possible.
how it works, and I can talk a little bit about RNG and stuff.
Sure, yeah, so landfills, the fuel source is decomposing biology, essentially, just decomposing trash. Typically, landfills are always growing, but it's a slow growth, and with more trash, more mounds of trash, is more gas that is produced, and there's only so much space a landfill has and only so much trash it can accept. When a landfill closes, which none of ours are closed yet that we're on, but if a landfill closes, they can produce methane gas for up to easily 20 years after it's been completely capped. That production tapers off with time, but usually 20 years is about the life expectancy post-capping.
I knew I was going to still be eating.
Nope, that's all right. I can talk about
I knew it, but
50% methane.
when you talk landfill gas, it is our most expensive contracted resource at over $100 a megawatt hour. We entered into the agreements at the time because of some combination of needs, and those resources were the best fit for those needs at the time. Now, there are more viable options that are more economical, and the natural gas industry is also going through a push for decarbonization. Well, it's really hard to decarbonize natural gas. I mean, it is a carbon-based resource. It just is difficult. But what a landfill produces is considered renewable natural gas. It's not, it's capturing something that's already going to be there. So the natural gas industry actually has a higher demand for landfill gas from a renewable natural gas standpoint. So from an electric producing standpoint, I would say that it's probably relatively unlikely that we would enter into an additional landfill agreement, because the value of it is so much greater to the natural gas industry. It's what there's another biodigester going in here south of town, but they're not going to be. Our biodigester, we captured the gas and made energy, burned it, turned an engine, generated electricity with it. What they're doing is blending it into the regular natural gas supply, and it's a renewable natural gas. So that's what you're seeing more biodigester, landfill gas, things like that are going the renewable natural gas route more so than electric generation.
So what we're seeing, so in 2022, where we're getting all of our power, that meets our needs, or do we still have to get things on the open market?
Love it. We're gonna go with that.
So, I mean, I'm looking at that,
No,
and so then I'm jumping to 2026, and the only thing that we have is 8, 9, and 10 that we're adding to that. And if you take 8, 9, and 10, it's even if you combine all of them, it's
You're
probably about a quarter of what.
One of those weird times when 8 plus 9 plus 10 does not equal 1.
8, 9, and 10, 8 plus 9 plus 10 are less than 1.
So, here,
it's perfect.
so,
You're drawing every single conclusion, in how we built this map and why we built it.
so the other is, which I can't answer, and my guess is that you can't answer, unless you got history class. So, at one time, all of our power was being generated from number 3. What year was that?
Oh, I see.
Like 18.
I have no clue.
When did Wolverine's transmission line come in? Was that the 60s?
I'd have to look back at the easements. I know we sold Whitesbridge Hydro in the early 50s. And I think that was the start of moving away.
Because we
I'm
were
not sure.
Whenever Wolverine brought in their transmission line is when we were no longer an island. We were no longer our own,
Self-supporting.
self-supporting, yeah.
Again, and I say this because I say this a lot of times when we're having this discussion for the public, because I think it's getting less and less, but for a long time, especially when the generators still were not being used, but sat over by our office, people still thought that our power was coming from that right there.
Sure.
And again, I growing up can remember the noise that was being generated out of that building, and that was where our power was coming from.
And that,
They were running 24/7.
You just hit on why we wanted to put this together, because I think the most common question I get, and I would imagine you all get very similar questions. Well, where does our power come from? Do you make it over there? Do you make the power at the place on Broadway, or do you make it at the place on Chatham? And you try to explain to people that the grid is really just a series of financial transactions. They gloss over real quickly, because none of the kilowatt hours can't say none definitively, but realistically, it is highly, highly unlikely that any of the kilowatt hours generated by one of our resources are actually consumed. Those electrons are being used to power things on our service territory. It's highly unlikely, and it's impossible to follow the flow of electrons, at that granular of a level. So, but the general conception is that the power comes from here, especially when we used to have the generators. And people know we have the turbines here, but it gets into the difference between the energy side of things and the capacity side of things. And
Well, the other is one of our other meetings, I think you had said, which was how an electron traveling from Louisiana to here was like
It's microseconds.
I mean, it was like,
It's
you're kidding me.
unbelievable.
I mean, it was,
yeah, that was about this time last year. I think it was exactly 11 months ago, because we were talking about the Pioneer Reserve auction.
Well, and I was actually just gonna mention that with MISO, our grid, this also kind of highlights, this is not unique to our state. This is not unique to us. You have large generation assets that are closing, and then 5 or 10 other generation assets get sprinkled across a wide area. So how do you interconnect all of these new resources, and go through like the MISO generation queue to get approved when it's just, right now they're being flooded with all these little projects instead of one big one.
So, and I'm jumping around. So the other is, because it's in the news a lot, what's your take on nuclear? Because again, I mean, they're talking about selling Palisades, and if you're keeping up with the news, the print, everything, they're talking about, you know, should we be opening more nuclear plants here in the state, and that was kind of a yes kind of answer.
What's your take on it, Casey?
Because
It's a loaded question.
I'll just state a couple facts about nuclear. It's one of two dispatchable, carbon-free energy resources. The other one that's really become more popular lately is hydrogen, so hydrogen gas.
And hydrogen might not necessarily be carbon-free depending on the process. Hydrogen's a loaded,
Yes.
there's green hydrogen and blue hydrogen and brown hydrogen
Well,
and black
A lot of
hydrogen.
hydrogen.
When we were at, went to Colorado Springs to the Lyman's Rodeo, we had the opportunity to go to NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab, and at that time, they were working on hydrogen for automobiles. I mean, it was, you know, pretty interesting what they were doing.
Yeah, a lot of reciprocating gensets, a lot of combustion turbines are being tested and approved for various blending ratios of hydrogen. So they're trying to essentially just see if their units can run on hydrogen, and if they can, how much, and trying to, I guess, get ready and be prepared for a greater demand on carbon-free energy resources.
The problem with nuclear at a macro level, what we think of in terms of Palisades or Cook or Vogtle, if you're following the news with nuclear, is cost. It's almost impossible to control your costs on a macro level nuclear scale. Vogtle is they're trying to energize it down, I don't know, Georgia, somewhere in the south, I can't remember exactly where it is, but I think it originally was a $10 billion project. I think it's hit $20 billion, and my numbers are off, I'm sure, but it's substantially over budget in talking with people far more intimate in the workings of those regulations. Every time an event happens, it takes so long to develop a nuclear power plant that there's inevitably going to be regulation changes and lessons learned from events, whether it's Fukushima or things that you don't hear about happening. Yeah, and it drives the cost up, and it's almost impossible. So where nuclear is going, and if you pay attention to the news, keep an eye out for advanced nuclear or SMRs, small modular reactors. TVA and Ontario Power have signed a memorandum of understanding to jointly work with
NuScale, I believe?
No, NuScale's out in UAMP.
Okay.
I think they're working with like Toshiba or somebody that, like an Asian company. I don't think it's Toshiba or something, but maybe it might be Mitsubishi. I can't remember, but they're working, and they have the concept is, with small modular reactors, is that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission would approve a design where on a macro level, when they're analyzing Vogtle, it's, all right, we've got to look at Vogtle and it's by itself ground up. The idea with a small modular reactor is kind of like a modular home.
Somewhat commoditized.
It's commodity, yeah, it's replicatable, and it's, for lack of better terms, it's modular. You know, there's 6 smaller units, and each one of those units has a pre-approved design, and whether that design is at UAMP's facility in Nevada or wherever it is, Idaho, that might be in Idaho, I don't remember.
believe. Yeah.
Or it's TVA site, if it's new scales, because UAMP is the Utah, I think, municipal power. It's the municipal, it's the MPPA of that region. But they've advanced it pretty far, but that's where they still have to get the cost down. And the timeline from, one of the biggest problems that we have with the grid is the pace of change. Is the pace of retirements is outpacing the pace of additions, which we capture some here. So it's boiling down that turnaround time frame from hey, we want to put a plant in here to it's producing power. UAPS is currently, I believe, 9 years into their project, and they don't anticipate energizing their small modular reactors till 2028, 2029. So, but that's a proof of concept type of project.
This is not, you know,
The goal is cut that down to about 7 or 6. But still, 6 years is a problem. At the pace of change right now, if you think about Campbell, we were given 3 years notice Campbell's gonna retire, 4 years notice that Campbell's gonna be retired early. That's not enough time. Even if small modular reactors were a viable, commercially viable option right now, we still didn't have time to implement one just because of the queue. There's all kinds of problems with evaluating the generation queue, interconnection process. There's a lot of challenges.
So where are we? And are we pretty much dependent on MPPA and are they as MPPA investing in all? Because you're just looking at it and you're going, we're not going to have enough power. So where are we going to come up with the power? Maybe you're going to. I'll shut up and let you move on and then ask.
No,
Let's touch on that just briefly, real quick, while we're talking about it. The answer is no. And it's not MPPA's fault. It's nobody's fault. It's timing. If you had all the power in the world and all the money in the world, it's still going to take you 7 to 8 years to get a project from concept to producing power, and that's assuming you can get things and can get through supply chain issues.
So smooth, yeah.
And really, a lot of it is there's not much appetite for any from at a local level. There's a drive around all north of here towards like Whitesbridge. All kinds of, we don't want industrial solar, so there's a lack of support for solar, there's a lack of support for wind. To the same tune, there's a lack of support for continued operation of carbon-based resources. So what resource, and Casey and I did an interesting exercise, and I wish we would have done it now that we're talking about it, to replace MPPA's section, or to replace Campbell 3, 800 megawatts. It's 3.5 square miles. And that's assuming, so that it would, a solar farm to replace Campbell would more than cover the footprint of the entire city of Lowell. So there's challenges to, every way you go, there's a challenge. So MPPA is very much actively pursuing things. It's what the hedge policy's for. So we are relying on market transactions, favorable market transactions, to make sure we're layering in commitments on an annual basis to improve our hedge position. So when we get to the prompt year, we're at our hedge position.
So my next question, I got a bunch of them. Let's see, we're going to go. So my next question is, seeing this, is all the other municipalities of MPPA in the similar boat as we are, and is Consumers Energy in the same boat as we are? Meaning that there's again, when we're looking at this, I'm just not trying to be negative, but I'm going, okay, there's going to be a shortage of power. So does that mean in 4 years, if there's a shortage, and usually if there's a shortage, the price of whatever you're short goes up. Just like when there's a shortage of fuel to operate your vehicles, all of a sudden it goes to, we're 386 right now, and they're talking higher yet. And so
if you'll recall, the same presentation that Casey did last year, and we'll probably do something very similar, that's what MISO was heeding the warning, hey, it's a very complicated topic, but this is not unique to us. It's not unique to Zone 7, which is the Lower Peninsula. It's not unique to MISO. And then you also get into the difference between energy adequacy and resource adequacy. So from a capacity standpoint, we talked a lot of capacity last year, and are there enough resources to meet the maximum demand? When you start talking energy, it becomes about the economics of individual units, and it gets far more complicated. Typically, units are dispatched in economic order. It's called economic dispatch. You want to produce power from your cheapest resource first, layer in the next most expensive. Well, to your point, what we're seeing is further out on the forward curves, 26, 27, those power prices are reflecting, the cost to secure bilateral agreements for 2026, because like I said, every year we make bilateral transactions to get us into the hedge window, where we recently authorized NPPA to approve transactions for this new hedge window for, now every year you roll into a new year and it rolls your everything forward. But we're seeing prices out in the 26, 27 timeframe much higher than anticipated even a couple months ago. So yes, there is already movement further out in the forward curve based on projections of what resources will be available to meet the needs when the needs need to be met. So there's also a timing issue. Wind or sun doesn't shine at night, obviously. So you've got to make sure there's no great storage capacity or storage ability right now. So energy's consumed or produced and consumed in real time, basically. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but the simple answer is yes.
Charlie, as time goes on and we're looking at the future, is there any consideration in giving Campbell another couple of years, or is it a dead stop that has to be done? Because not only is our region, but other regions, and I heard some speculation that the government was looking at maybe extending some of the license, some of the coal due to that 7-year swelling between what we have and what we don't have.
So I would hesitate to speak to consumers' motivations on shutting down Campbell. I do not anticipate it remaining open past the announced retirement date. I think that's fair, Casey?
Yeah, and the other thing I think to also mention is with pretty much all of these projects, except 2 of them, we are partners. We are not the MPPA. MPPA is partners with the owner of the generation facility, so we are not the majority of the ownership. We very much have a backseat kind of role in the generation facilities, how they operate, when they close. The only ones that we have direct control over are our own and MPPA's Kalkaska peaking facility. Every single other one, I believe we're a minority in all of them, aren't we? I mean,
MPPA might be the anchor tenant in 1 or 2 of the solar agreements.
Yeah, I can't
I think
remember.
maybe Hard Solar, where the MPPA may be the anchor tenant, but
we're still a tenant.
But we're still a
Right.
tenant.
We don't.
So you're saying, when you say we, you're saying MPPA, of which we're a smaller part, yeah?
Correct.
Yeah.
We are a small percentage within MPPA as a whole. Typically, we're in like Lowell is in single-digit percentages of ownership. Typically.
So one question I have is, like right now, how much of our power do we get from like the open market?
Perfect. You guys are.
I told you we would adjust slides, and it's a complete opposite order of what we should have done.
That's true.
It's funny, I told him yesterday, we adjusted something, I said, we're gonna go from here to, it's gonna be focused more on a timeline, not a quantity standpoint.
Well, we fit on both, so.
Yeah. Go
My
ahead.
follow-up question was gonna be like, if you go to 2026, what's the size of the circle of that market power that we would need? Like, what's the gap?
We'll get,
Yes,
yes,
we're gonna
that's
get
the
there,
next
Which
slide.
circle is represents the gap?
Yeah, so I just kind of boiled down major energy events, over the near future. Like I said, this year, May 31st is the contract commission date when they have to have it up and running by then. 2024 is kind of quiet, but then 2025 is going to be the biggest change that I can foresee in our future as far as energy, and we'll get to why. So if you remember 2025, Campbell 3 is closing, so coal facility closing, and 2 solar facilities are being commissioned that year. And then with Bell River, so both of these are Bell River, what they're doing is they have 2 units there, 2 boilers, and they're basically going to shut 1 unit down, retool it, repipe it, reconstruct it to operate on natural gas instead of coal. They're going to start it up, then they're going to shut down the other unit, rebuild the boiler for natural gas, and then start that up. Each conversion is going to take about a year. So that's why those are kind of phased and spaced out a year apart. Any questions on that one? This one's not as
loaded.
informative.
Other than the fact that Bell River will lose half of its capability during that time frame.
It will.
Yes, and when we're talking, now we're talking specifically energy.
Right.
Going from a coal plant to a natural gas plant, which Bell River's capacity factor, which is basically what percentage of the time does it run at full capacity? Right now, I think Bell River typically runs around 50 or 60%. It's not a super high performing facility where Campbell runs north of 90%.
All the time.
Yeah, it's always, Campbell's always running almost maxing out its output.
Cheapest energy.
Well, one would think if Campbell 3 closes, Bell River's output's gonna have to go up.
And that's where they're independent. One's majority owned by DTE, one's majority owned, and there are still other pieces that are unknown in this puzzle. There are new resources coming online. Consumers is taking a natural gas plant from down in the Covert region, and it's going to be right now it's currently interconnected to PJM, but they're in a unique location where they can reconnect to MISO and dump capacity and dump a resource on a MISO that's existing. So there's a lot of pieces, but when Bell River does come back as a natural gas plant, the highest estimate that I've seen is a 30% load factor.
Okay.
So it's going to run 30% of the time versus Bell River's 60%. So there's still, even with it being repowered, it's not like it's a 1-for-1 replacement. Once that circle goes to natural gas, it'll get smaller. And it's just, it'll be a quasi-economically dispatched unit where, I say coal is cheap because typically it can be a cheaper form of power. That's why it was so popular, but Bell River has significant environmental compliance costs that go with it. So, yeah.
Any questions on this one? All right, we can go to the next one. All right, so again, another nice loaded chart. So what I show here, and I want you to think about this like your electric bill on your house. Okay, so you consume energy at your house, you get a bill, however much power you use is how much energy you use, how many, obviously, things you power. So what I have in 2022 is our actual energy that the entire town used to power it for that whole year. And where that energy came from. So you could see the majority of the energy came from coal on the bottom. I don't have them in exact order, but you can see wind, natural gas, landfill gas, solar. Now that top kind of hatchy part, that's the bilateral agreements and market balancing. So that's where we kind of fill in the gap for what we don't have in our own resources. We get from bilateral agreements and market balancing. I guess I don't know if you want to go into the difference between the two or.
Yeah, we can talk, I can briefly talk, a bilateral purchase is essentially just an agreement, it's a set agreement for a set number of megawatt hours during a set time frame, and it's typically done further in advance. Mm-hmm. Market balancing occurs in the day-ahead market and the real-time market. So every day MPPA puts in and says, it's hour by hour. At this hour, Lowell needs this much power. At this much, and it's ultimately the net position that we have from forecast to our firm commitments. We're forecasted to be running at 15 megawatts right now for this hour, average 15 megawatts over this entire hour, and we only have 12 committed. In the day-ahead market, MPPA will commit us to that 3 megawatt gap, and then in the real time, you truly balance up. And there's always a small discrepancy, but obviously the goal is to try and line up as much as you can, because this gets into hedge strategy a little bit, but our hedge window is between 75% and 95%. So we always want to have between 75 and 95% of our needs met through firm commitments. Firm commitments can be bilateral purchases or any of the contracted agreements we have or PPAs that we have, so everything but market balancing. But that's why we sit in that 75 to 95% window, because you hedge for price certainty, but it does cost, you pay a little bit of a premium to have price certainty.
So what fraction of that shape of that crosshatch region is bilateral versus market?
That changes significantly. Typically, bilaterals have been a very small percentage of our needs. That is growing significantly. So just to give you an idea, I've got it pulled up.
You asked that, and I was thinking about making them two separate numbers, because
I was wondering that.
yeah.
Yeah, so right now, so in our current, the current 12-month window from May 2023 through April 2024, we hovered in the, I'll call it 2,000 megawatt hour frame out of 82,000. Our annual need is roughly 82,000 megawatt hours. Typically we've gotten about 2,000 megawatt hours a year through bilaterals. 2025,
So
we've already,
70,
yeah.
and then the rest would be the market balancing for
Yeah.
2022.
Yeah, so the biggest percentage of that is going to be market balance, or it's going to be your bilateral purchases, but 2025, we've already committed to 14,000 megawatt hours of through bilaterals. So it's a tool. We're using bilaterals as a tool to bridge the transition to some extent. The bilaterals are great. It's a financial transaction, but we lose a little bit of control over our resources and where we actually get our power from at that point. And you're more subject to market conditions because it is a financial transaction. We see quite a bit of movement in the bilateral market based on there's anticipations that this summer will dictate a lot of bilaterals 3 years out. Mm-hmm. And it's just that market reaction to what's currently happening.
So my questions what's going on, so what's going on in 2023 that coal is, we're getting less from coal, whereas 22 and 24, even 24 looks like we're getting a little bit more in coal.
Yep.
We're getting more in,
Yeah.
so what's happening to, so landfill gas, all of a sudden, we're looking at here, and if you look at 23 to 24, and yeah, I guess you'd have to go back to that first slide, but we're not, we still have this, we haven't purchased any more landfill gas, we still have the same percentage, but we're using, in 2024, we're using more landfill, we're using more solar, and it wasn't until 2026 where three of the there was like three of them that were 8, 9, and 10 weren't coming online till 2026, 2025,
Sure.
2026. So what are we predicting that it's gonna be a bright sunshinier year in 2024 than 23?
Sure, no.
Where's all the, how are you coming up with the numbers?
Sure, so in 2022, those are actual.
Those are
real
actual,
numbers.
yep.
Once you get into 2023 and beyond, I used MPPA provided projections. Now, we can kind of talk about different fuel sources and why they vary. Kind of like we were saying before, we're not like the owner of the coal facilities, right? So we don't dictate planned outages, maintenance, when they run, when they don't run. And what those variations reflect is what MPPA knows about how the owners will operate the facility, when they will take a planned outage, how long it will be, how that affects the overall energy that the facility produces for the year. So that's where those variations come in. And this coal is the combination of both Campbell 3 and Bell River. So I can't remember which one is varies more, but that's the combination of the two, not just one facility. Also with this total height, think of the total height as the energy need, and then these are our resources that we have to fill that need, and then this is kind of the fill in the gap zone up there.
But also specifically to solar, we have a new plant coming on this year, which will increase, and last year we had Assembly 2 come on, I believe it was last year.
I think so.
So, but we're getting, it really is just the addition of getting that one unit back on. And these, like I said, these are projections.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are, I'm assuming that there are plants that will come online. Perhaps, I mean, it seems like there are speculator investors out there building power plants, not even registering with MISO because they're like, screw you. We'll come online, or we'll get ready to come online, and then we'll have to accept this because we'll be ready to go and you'll need the power.
I'm not sure I've heard of that happening.
Yeah.
And the hope is yes, but there is not a resource that is without significant challenges to bring to the grid right now. I did get an email from MPPA, and they're always, they field calls every week from developers. The problem is if they hear from 100, 2 may be viable. So you weed out a lot of, it's more weeding out, there's a lot of speculative developers out there. There are not as many transactable counterparties. We would never enter into an agreement with somebody that took that approach. The risk would just be too high. There's just so much uncontrollable risk, and so one of the things that we at MPPA has to always consider is the creditworthiness of the counterparty. Are they going to be there for long enough to fulfill their obligations under an agreement? and developers that are not participating in the tried and true methods, while they are old and need to be updated, that's still the avenue you have to go. From a risk standpoint, it would be a big challenge. Now, there are utilities, large utilities like Lansing. Lansing brought on, we toured it, natural gas plant, the Delta Energy Park natural gas plant, and that is behind the meter. So that doesn't involve the MISO queue to the same extent. I don't know exactly what it requires, but
Yeah,
that's one of the motivations behind going behind the meter.
because they own their own transmission line.
Yeah. So it doesn't, so there's a lot of challenge. There's more questions than there's answers on power supply, especially the future of power supply over the next year.
So, you can see as time goes on, our solar does get larger. 2025, this is when in the spring Campbell 3 shuts down. So in 2026, this will be a little bit smaller. And then when they all ultimately retool Bell River, you'll see this natural gas grow quite a bit.
And coal disappear.
Coal will disappear. So
We will be a coal-free utility
27.
27.
And you can see, like Charlie was saying,
Aside from like the bilateral market.
I was gonna say, there is a caveat to that there are
But we just don't
there
know
are
what's gonna
market
be.
purchases and bilateral agreements that are not resource specific.
and like Charlie was saying, the cost or the value of bilateral purchases is going up. And you can see why, our demand here is going up.
Resources are going down.
Resources are going down, demand is gonna go up for bilateral purchases.
And 2025 is like when we get a bigger chunk from the MPPA, whatever it was, the hedge plan that we signed, when they extended the hedge plan, they give us like 2 years of extra chunk of hedges, right? I mean, that's partly to make up for,
So
we have more of a
expanding.
shortfall than other members.
Oh, you're talking about the battery deal.
Yeah.
You're talking about the battery deal. So
Yeah.
one thing that we'll talk about is, you'll notice there is no battery project component on any of these, because it's not an energy resource, it's just it's a capacity only transaction.
Right.
So that will produce no energy,
But that doesn't have to do
but
with
it
the fall.
does, it has to do with the fact that our
We're more
capacity
exposed.
position is significantly impacted by the early retirement of Campbell, because it provides the biggest,
Which one?
Campbell, is it more than our generators back here? No,
No.
Campbell's 6
4 points.
or 4.6,
Yeah.
4.7, these are 6 point, so from a capacity standpoint, the resource we get the least amount of energy from produces the most amount of capacity
Correct.
until we get to the battery deal, and then there's zero energy, and we'll get a pretty good bit of capacity from that. But yes, that's exactly why MPPA allocated opportunity differently in years 1, 2, and 3 versus the remaining years of the battery contract. It's because we were proportionately more impacted than other utilities in our capacity position through the early retirement of Campbell.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Any other questions on this one? I think I just got one more. All right, so then I broke the 2022 year down into months. So I wanted to show you kind of seasonally what happens. And I wanted to kind of differentiate between the two coal facilities here. So this is Campbell 3, Bell River. Sorry if it's too small to read, but just to show, when I was looking at this, Campbell 3 produces about the same amount of energy as all of our other resources combined. So I thought that was kind of significant to see how much power, how much energy we actually get out of Campbell 3.
So does that like integrate over the whole year though? Because there's that big dip. in the spring.
So, what this is telling you is, they shut down in March,
Oh,
or they had.
It's a plant shutdown.
so they don't normally do that.
No, almost every year.
Oh, every year.
Mhm.
So
On an
then-
annual basis, all your major baseload generators will shut down at least once a year. A lot of them will do a spring and fall planned outage, but they do it in the spring and fall typically. And this will tee things up for here in a couple of months. Going to ask Casey to come back and do another presentation on the capacity side of things, and talk about seasonally accredited capacity, the new capacity structure that MISO's moved to. But that becomes an issue when we move to seasonally accredited capacity. But you also will notice a dip in November between both of the coal plants, and that's another smaller planned outage.
Yep.
So you see a lot of spring and fall outages from baseload resources.
So do the other ones have that? I don't see like the yellow, green, orange. They don't have those kind of shutdowns for those type of plants, or do they?
So the yellow is solar,
Which is almost no outage outside
Yeah,
if
'cause
the
there's
sun's
so many.
not shining.
but some key things to look at is how much or how thick that line is in January compared to July and August. And hence the seasonal accreditation, I'll talk about that more in a couple months. Wind, actually produces the most in the fall and winter time,
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting.
It's a good resource to match it. This graph shows up,
Mhm.
shows why, diversification of resources is really,
Wind and solar match in this region.
yeah, they pair up well. Your wind blows when your sun doesn't shine as much, your sun shines when your wind doesn't blow as much.
Yeah, landfill gas is just consistent all year round, because I think ultimately landfill gas is the sum of like 6 or 7 individual generators, owned by 2 different companies, so very diversified. They're always,
They may do shutdowns, but it just wouldn't show
Yeah.
up because they're not gonna,
exactly.
unless they time them to
It
coincide.
highlights the need to
Exactly.
diversify your power
Yeah.
supply.
Okay, so the other thing I want to point out, this blue line here is just MPPA, Kalkaska, the peaking facility. Our Lowell generators here is that little sliver right there. I didn't want to put them together so you could see the difference.
Right.
So,
We just don't, our resources are not energy resources, they're capacity resources.
yeah.
So this highlights, and what this really highlights is 20 years ago, there weren't separate conversations focused on energy adequacy and resource adequacy or capacity adequacy. It was, do we have what we need? Because it just the nature of the energy being produced, you matched up energy and capacity, where as we get to more intermittent resources, not every resource supports the grid equally all the time.
Right.
It goes back to, and I don't want to pick on renewables because it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be commentary on the value of renewables at all, because they play a very critical part in our power supply, and quite frankly, they're some of the most economical resources we have right now. So, but it highlights that it can't only be wind and solar. We need, to your earlier point, we need carbon-free baseload resources that help support the grid and align resource adequacy and energy adequacy a little closer.
Are you seeing this trend globally or pretty much in the states of the coal being decommissioned and everything? I mean,
There's,
and the reason,
Maybe not globally, but
I would say globally, I would say it depends. China burns a boatload of coal. Well, in the U.S., there's a lot of federal, I don't want to say motive, everything sounds negatively connotated, but there's environmental compliance associated with coal that makes it very costly. So even if even if places are not feeling the same societal pressures, like in the south, tend to be more, less supportive of, you can't, how is it, you can't talk about energy without it being mixed up in politics. It's a very politicized topic.
West Virginia, Montana.
Yeah, and a lot of it's tied into local economies, so even the places where there's not as much societal pressure to retire, to go to a carbon-free, you're getting financial pressure. It makes, quite frankly, Bell River right now is extremely costly power. Bell River's $80 a megawatt hour. Our solar agreements are in the 40s. But, not to, Campbell's also in the 40s. So coal for us can be $45 a megawatt hour, can be $85 a megawatt hour, 200 miles apart or however far apart
Right.
the two facilities are. So I would say in the US, yes, there's a trend towards, and there will continue to be a push towards decarbonization in general, in a large, the electric sector gets a lot of attention because I think behind transportation, it's the largest carbon emitting industry in the country. So we will continue as an industry to be the focus of conversations on decarbonizing our society.
Interesting thing that I looked up on this graph. August was our highest energy consumption month, but our peak power demand, so when our town instantaneously hit the highest load, was in June.
Which again goes back to energy adequacy and resource adequacy.
And it makes sense, right? Because in August, obviously, you probably have warmer nights,
Longer sustained.
more air conditioning. Where in June, you may still be getting cool nights, but you get a peak consumption in June, but yeah, we use more energy in August. And also another interesting fact that I saw was in October, our resources actually produced more than we needed. So we actually sold power. We were ahead or had a surplus of energy, so we got to sell it, which is unique. So.
Okay,
So,
Great, thank you. Appreciate everybody's time.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that was
Thank you.
amazing.
That's very nice.
Thank you.
Good job.
Oh my gosh.
I learned a lot.
Yeah, you should have office.
I'm trying to pull my chin off the floor. This was a great
How about the best you?
display of what we're gonna be facing. Of course, in layman's terms, there's gonna be somebody out there that says, well, why are you shutting down? Like it's our, that would be, like it's our, we don't want to, but,
no, and I've actually had local residents ask me, why are you shutting down Campbell?
okay. What's your answer?
I tell them, I said, we don't have a controlling stake in the plant. We are a minority owner, a very small minority owner in the plant, and quite frankly, we don't have that control. I mean, that's as truthful as it can be, and
Right.
I don't want it to come off as we're not big enough to have enough power to be efficient, but there are benefits of being small and there are disadvantages of being small. In my opinion, the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages because we have ability to control and manage through the disadvantages. But one of the disadvantages is we don't have a controlling interest in our power supply from an operational standpoint. We can choose where we invest, we can choose which partners we invest with, but at the end of the day, we're not going to be calling the shots on how that plant is operated. And quite frankly, we're not equipped. I couldn't tell consumers how to operate an 800 megawatt coal-fired power plant. I can't tell them what their coal purchasing strategy should be. And, that's the answer. We just don't have a controlling interest and don't have the ability to stop something. And that project is, that gets into a very convoluted answer as well, because it gets, there are a lot of motivations behind why
consumers is shutting down Campbell, and I wouldn't want to speculate on their motivations, but it's never a simple answer.
Do you see government playing a role in this whole energy thing? And where does,
Government's already getting involved because citing issues. I think you'll see the legislature in Michigan try to address some of the challenges to bringing new generation to the grid.
How wind is dead. Everywhere.
We'd have a very different conversation without a camera rolling. I don't want to, it would be speculation, but yes, I think government has to play a role. But again, it's such a loaded conversation. The energy industry has been so heavily politicized that everything is a challenge. But in politics, everything's a challenge.
Well, there's just a lot of unknown, and until some of that technology and other things settle out, that's the politics of it can have more influence because there's uncertainty to play against.
There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty right now. I mean, there's not a small modular reactor that's operational for an electric distribution or transmission distribution purpose right now. I mean, there's small modular reactors on nuclear subs, nuclear ships, things like that. That's basically a small modular reactor, but and that's a technology we're absolutely counting on. So to what extent does the government facilitate that? The government's already played a humongous role in that. They have subsidized to the tune of, I don't remember how many hundreds of millions of dollars, the NuScale project out west, but without governmental assistance, nobody is going to take on the liability and the risk of proof of concept. I mean,
Just the military itself did a lot of that, so.
yeah. So the government has to play a role, and we're dealing. And this is partial. I'll throw this is very loaded with my own opinions, but a lot of the challenges to bringing new generation across the board, whether that's natural gas, wind, or solar, or whatever, not fuel source specific, happens at the local level. But we're dealing with regional and national issues. So when we're seeing it, I'll use renewables as an example. Go drive around in rural Michigan and you will find signs in people's yards that say, I don't want wind, I don't want solar. I understand.
Why do you say you understand?
Would you want 40 big windmills disrupting your panoramic view of your river that you have out there, the awesome view you have out of the back of your house? Would you want a man-made something? People have different opinions on that. So I can understand, we took the back way from Frankenmuth back here, and we drove through this cool wind field. I love it. I think it's awesome.
I think it's beautiful.
But I can also, how am I supposed to tell that person you should be happy looking at that?
Right.
Now, there's a greater need, but that's where, with so much of the issues happening at the local level, there's so much difference in opinion in such a small geographic area that it makes development extremely challenging, because you may be good on this side of the road in this township. Yeah, we're pro-wind, pro-wind. You cross the road, you may be in a completely different political environment trying to get things done at the local level. So I think what you will see is the government step in and try and address some of these siting issues, address some of these transmission issues, but there's a giant, they call it the transmission loop, they call it the thumb loop. You'll never guess where it's at. But Pegasus, if you remember, the green dot was over here in the thumb. Pegasus is our wind project. It tied into the transmission thumb loop. It was a multi-$100-million project. It's something like 20% prescribed right now because there's all this capacity to draw on wind energy in the thumb
but there's no local appetite for having a landscape covered with solar panels. So at the local level, they passed zoning ordinances that restricted that. But at some point, and I'm not saying who's right or wrong, but at some point, transmission planning, site planning, everybody has to be on the same page, because now the ratepayers, including all of us, have paid to build this massive transmission line throughout the loop to tap into this renewable resource, and then and then after the fact, it's met with local resistance. So you get into very complicated arguments over local control. We're very much, we're a textbook definition of local control right here. So, I mean, do you want this MPSC stepping in, telling this board what they can and can't do? It's not a hypothetical question, it's a loaded question, but you start getting into some of those challenges of.
There's advantages and disadvantages too, though.
And there is no clear-cut black and white answer. It's some middle ground balance typically. I don't know what that is, but the government's gonna have to play a role, in some role in aiding and assisting in the redevelopment of the electric grid. And they already are. There's legislation all over the place about siting and transmission and right of first refusal laws for investments, and there's quite a bit of governmental involvement.
I had one more question for Casey, but you're already stoned.
What you got? I bet I can answer.
Okay, so traveling out to Denver and Iowa, how do they get every wind to blink at the very exact time? The red light.
The red light.
Yeah.
Red lights.
You go
All the way across the whole country.
It's a cut to the.
They all blink at the exact same time.
If I had to guess, technology.
Probably
Software,
what do you call it?
Probably network.
I'll say it's a network solution. I have no clue. I
Atomic
thought you were
clock.
going to ask a question I might have an answer to. I have no clue that answer.
Sync to the clock.
I would say sync it to
Atomic clock.
the atomic clock or
The
something.
bigger question would be, what if one of them was not the same?
What happens when there's a leap second?
Yeah.
I read about leap seconds recently. All right, sorry. I'm fascinated by leap seconds, so.
Yeah, save it for comments.
Oh, I get my own comment. You want to talk about leap seconds today?
Already got 32 of them.
Okay,
Make your-
time.
We're not beating last month's record, that's for sure.
All right, well, you ready to dive into action items, Barry?
Yeah.
All right. First action item up, adoption of the 17th edition of the APPA Safety Manual. Happy to answer any questions. I provide a little commentary, but at the end of the day, we rely on the industry as a whole to guide safety practices. APPA does a great job of periodically pulling together a team from the industry, reviewing safety standards, looking at updates, new guidance, what are things that have changed, what are new practices, how can we do things better? So as the title implies, this is the 17th edition, 17th version of APPA Safety Manual. And historically, we have, and I would like to continue to adopt APPA Safety Manual as our internal practices. I think it makes a whole lot of sense to leverage the industry as a whole to help guide us. So we have historically adopted and followed the APPA's safety standards. And with the recent release of the 17th edition, it is our recommendation for the board to proceed with adopting the 17th edition as our new safety standard.
I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Supported. It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
All right, on to benevolence policy review. As I talked about last month, We've been doing, including a policy in the board packet for review every month, just to kind of put them periodically in front of your face, so you can see them without necessarily doing a deep dive into our policies, because that would be a pretty extensive and laboring conversation to talk policy for that much. But with the natural order as we've worked through our policies, the benevolence policy has come up, and the other policies we've touched on, there hasn't been, it's really just been a review, here you go. We've not seen a need to propose changes, but when we got to the benevolence policy, we've had enough conversation. Perry, you and I have had a lot of conversations, and this is a policy that I think there's a desire to update. Specifically, I mentioned last month, as our labor costs have increased, our ability to stay under the $1,000 threshold for in-kind donations is not really feasible at this point. So the one, I guess, bit of commentary I would have is, I think it makes a lot of sense to separate out and treat financial support and in-kind donations differently. You know, there's different costs associated. Financial support is obviously a cash support, cash hit, but an in-kind donation is more, you know, it's more about the opportunity cost. What could we be doing with our employees instead of doing this benevolence type work? I'll also say I'm a very big fan of the in-kind support we provide this community. I think it is highly aligned with our values, the values of public power, and just think it's important to do what we are best equipped to do for the community. And in-kind donations can be a somewhat time-sensitive thing. Recently had an event come up that was a really awesome event, got pulled together very quickly, and there was no opportunity for board discussion. And what we did was we hooked up our power distribution panel and provided power to the event. So it was minimal labor, very minimal labor, very minimal much of anything, but we're equipped to quickly respond to events that make our community better, and we're also the best equipped to do things like the banner work for the chamber, and which supports a variety of really good causes that support this community. But public power as being part of the community that you serve, and for that benevolence work, I would say is very, very important to our identity and what we can do for this community.
Hey, I would say that, the in-kind work just needs to be done at the discretion of the general manager, and then reported to the board at each monthly board meeting. And I think it's that time, the board gets a chance to say, okay, do we like the path that we're on? Or do we, hey, Charlie, kind of pull the reins back a little bit on it,
So, I would take it further. I would take it further in that, number one, I think we can separate the in-kind and the monetary somewhat. The in-kind, when our guys can go and do something, it's, the public sees it. And I think that's important. Just like when we do the road cleanup, the public, cars are flying, the public sees us out doing something for the community. The other is, so the monetary in there is the same as when we were a $3 million company, and we are now approaching, we will hit 10 million this year. So I believe that that it should be adjusted. I believe that the general manager keeps on top of that. And I think it should be up to the discretion of the general manager unless somebody comes in and says, I need 3,000 or I need 2,000, I mean, but I don't, I just think that's, again, a role that the general manager should be.
Well, I agree. I mean, and that said, like Charlie, I mean, he's an excellent general manager.
Record it. Oh, wait.
But what if, God forbid, Charlie leaves? We get somebody else. And it's like, oh my God, what is
Well,
this?
but then if it's, if that's when the board has the flexibility to reel things back in and to go back in to change that. I think it's, for me, it's nice to know, but I think it's micromanaging, even the benevolence, I think it's micromanaging the general manager.
At the end of the day, I agree.
And I think, unless it exceeds a parameter, then I just feel like it doesn't need to come to the board.
So to give a little commentary on what we've historically spent, separating out financial and in-kind. Financial donations, I think the board is aware that annually we support Rotary in the holiday lighting competition, which is going to probably change to a holiday lighting trail next year. We met today about it, actually. Working with Rotary early this year. We did Little League for $450 for the first time last year. And then the Showboat Committee in 2021, we made, or fiscal year 2021, so I don't know exactly when it landed, but FY 2021, we did $1,000 to the Showboat Committee. We don't get a lot of financial, can you please cut us a check type of requests. That could change, to your point, that very well could change. From a in-kind donation, the two biggest ones we have historically supported have been Pink Arrow and the Chamber. Those are all, I would also say, are the ones that are big enough that we make a separate work order and kind of track it. I would say we do a lot of small in-kind stuff that, and we help the city get the big wind chime down at the North Washington property.
You cut the flagpole off, put your boat for.
I forgot about that.
It's not a risk in my life going out of the stuff.
Yeah, but it's a lot of smaller stuff, and again, that's a great example. We are the best equipped to respond now. Got a need, there's a problem, let's help. So there's a lot. I would say that the two big events, the two biggest things that we help with are Pink Arrow and the Chamber. And I'll say for me personally, coming to Lowell, the Pink Arrow thing is one of the coolest things this community does. Not kissing your butt, Perry, it genuinely is. I have no interest in stop doing that work. And it highlights it. We spend $3,000 to $3,500 a year in labor doing the chamber makers. And that number has grown significantly as we've made wage corrections. So this, not only to your point of, it's been $5,000 total since we were a $3 million a year company, it's also been $1,000 max in-kind donation since salaries were significantly less than what they are now. So it grew a little bit, but I would also say from an in-kind standpoint, for me, we have a list of priorities. Customer needs are always the top. Outages, getting the lights back on are always top priority. Getting the new lights turned on is a priority. Kind of everything else. I mean, we're here ultimately to serve our customers in our core business. We're also here to be a part of the community and prop this community up. So some of that benevolence work can come pretty soon after that, but it turns into an opportunity cost more than a financial commitment. That's hours that we can't
do other things. But I would also say, when you stack up the benevolence work and the importance of everything that we do, it's very important for us to play an active role in supporting this community. I won't quantify quantify the amount or where it stacks up in priorities, but ultimately the key with the in-kind work is, are our customer needs being met? Are our community needs being met? And I would like to continue to do that. But a lot of the in-kind stuff is very small stuff. The event that we help put power up, the flagpole, the wind chime, we're going to help from deliver barrels for the food fight thing. Like, there's just good things to be seen doing, and even if we're not seen, it's good things to support the community.
Well, I mean, I think some of those are kind of like that minimus concept, right?
Yes.
And, you know,
And if
it makes
is-
sense to do it, it's nothing significant impact, we might as well do that. And as far as in-kind goes, I'd be more concerned with hours than cost, right? We're paying our employees, whether they're donating their time, you know, or on behalf of Empower, or if they're doing, you know, regular work. And so it's just, like you mentioned, it's just what are we not doing because we're doing that instead? And I think as long as we just establish like a reasonable limit, or just hey, if we're gonna contribute more than this much, bring it to the board, something like that.
I think
I think the other part for both financial and hours is just, if we're starting to give a lot to one particular group, that we want to bring that to the board, just to make sure that there's not appearances of favoritism or those kinds of things that could come up. But I mean, something like Little League, I don't think the board needs to be involved. If we want to sponsor a Little League team, cool. You know,
The other is, and I'm gonna say, it's great for the community to see us helping, doing this, but I think it puts a pride in our employees that are out there.
And
doing
connecting
this.
to the
And I think,
community
and I
themselves,
think,
yeah.
and I think that's a very valuable asset, is instilling that pride in our employees that are out doing those things. And they like, we have a great group of employees that like doing those things, and I certainly want to continue that. And but again, I think it's something that, as Andrew said, there's something, that needs to come back. But other than that, I think it's something that the general manager deals with. And again, and I just say that because, again, the things that that we're all involved in the community, I don't think it's something that, like you said, there was a fundraiser for a person that was on a cancer journey, and again, we put this together in 2.5 weeks, and so, to actually come to Light and Power, to the board and say, nah, we need that panel.
We need a half hour, and we need to borrow the panel for 4 hours.
Right. So,
I left your name with the event out of it because
I know.
it had nothing to do, it had nothing to do with, wasn't playing favoritism. It was a great event for this community, and we need to be there.
So, I mean, what do we want to do with the monetary amount? Do we want to raise that threshold
I
right
guess-
now? Or do we just want to purely leave it up to the general manager to make a budget?
I guess I would like to see Charlie come back to the next council meeting after talking with his staff, or not council meeting.
Talking next Monday.
Yeah, okay, I'll bring it up.
But board meeting with a number that we would, that we would endorse or.
Okay.
And I've looked at some numbers, and I've got some numbers prepared. I think we could make it kind of looks kind of funny as a percentage of our revenue, because it's a very small percentage of our revenue. It's,
Right.
I'd have to pull it up, it's like 0.06%.
Right,
I
yeah.
mean, it's a very, but we could tie it
Which comes
to
out to,
$5,000 of
yeah,
9 million or something. These numbers were a little old, but what I think, what I would, I guess, propose and can draft is separate things out into in-kind donations and financial support. Do an hour threshold, some sort of person hour, working hour threshold before it should come to the board. On the in-kind side, and then on the financial support, I think that number can probably stay pretty low, because we just don't get a lot of, but I like, if we're gonna write a check, maybe, I can present a couple different options, but if we're gonna separate out in-kind and financial support, I like the board having more say over who we cut checks to. I know who we need to cut checks to on a day-to-day operation basis. What bills do we need to pay? I think it's potentially a quicker threshold to get the board involved on writing a check, because there's more opportunity for prying eyes to not see the full picture. We're not gonna play favoritisms. I mean, if the organization supports the community and it's a good cause, we're gonna support it. But there could be different opinions as to what is a good cause and what's not a good cause. So I can draft up some red line on this, separate the two out, and see what, throw some spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks, see what you guys, what you're comfortable with. But what I'm hearing is less board involvement with guardrails. At some point, you know, reporting is important, I agree, I love the idea of if we do something, have the expectation that I come to you all the next month and make you aware of it. I think that's important, because I don't want somebody coming up saying, hey Perry, thanks for helping with this or something. And you go, I have no clue what you're talking about. So there's a communication aspect that's important to just know what we're doing. But yeah, I think I can, I don't think it needs to be an overly complicated policy. Unfortunately, usually when, I think of the prohibited benefits policy, it went from one paragraph, about a page, to 2.5 pages. I don't think this is one of those policies that needs to grow like that. It's just a matter of, you know, trying to identify major components and separating them out.
And so you're looking to do like a, you're saying trying to tie it like a percent wise? Like say we should, some you're suggesting that.
But based on Perry's comments of, hey, we had $5,000 threshold and we were a $3 million company, now we're 10, should our benevolence budget, I guess, benevolence opportunities from a financial support grow as we grow? And also, should it get peeled back if we lose significant load? You know, if all of a sudden we have a major industry leave, don't we want our benevolence activities to potentially follow the ebbs and flows of our revenues?
I mean, I kind of like the idea, but like you said, if it changes a lot, I wouldn't want to say, hey, to some organization that we routinely support, say, sorry, we can't afford that this year, and have to pick somebody because we can't per our policy. And I kind of like the idea of targeting it to that, but maybe with like a range. Other thoughts that had come to mind was, if we're gonna, I like the idea of, I think Period said if we have a budget for this, right? So kind of say, hey, for this year, we're gonna budget this much benevolence, but make sure part of that is like unallocated, right? So we know that we're gonna probably have, you know, Rotary and Chamber and other things that are known, but then make sure we keep a certain portion of it unallocated for new opportunities.
Robotics team.
Yeah. But
last year, it wasn't.
Exactly.
I didn't know there was one.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't planning to be a year ago. But it was the other thing was, I think it'd be good to do a similar thing for the hours part. You know, if we have this much, you know, man-hour time we spend doing things, let's have a similar type target, right? Because if we suddenly have a shortage of staff, should we look at hey, how much extra time do we want to spend on this if we've now, that X% of our staff is now gone, kind of thing.
Another thing is, right now, the policy is, the board shall not. To me, this is a policy that the board should have, which you already have discretion. You could vote to change the policy and then immediately vote to, so trying to set your own, I get why it's done. You know, at the time, it was, we shall not do this. But ultimately, you have policy-making authority.
Our bylaws allow for everything that we were not conflict with, yeah, we're fine, yeah, okay.
Our enabling legislation is the city charter,
Yeah,
and there's nothing in there.
that's
No, we could vote
city
it.
charter.
We could vote you out tonight and then.
Reinstate them tomorrow.
I mean, the policy given like,
It'd be like going back to Tennessee.
the policy giving guidelines for like who can apply, what matches what we're looking for, I think that's the good part of the policy. The number is, right, whether it's, we change it every year, I wonder, could it make sense to make that a budget review consideration every year, so we look at it, is 5,000 still good this year? Yeah, we've never even hit that, okay, good. Even if we keep growing as a company, hey, what is that maybe you can bring us some, this is what it has done in the past, this is what percentage of revenue it's been, so we get an idea of like, well, maybe we up that to like 7,000, you know, going forward, or if we get more, but giving you kind of the
Budget.
you know, giving you the reins on in-kind donations, I think to a limit that we all would be like, okay, if it's all of a sudden, you know, 2,000 hours and $10,000 to something, and that's gotta come to us to be like, because it could be something we said, yeah, this is what we need to do this year, it's a one-time thing or whatever, but giving you a lot of that reign, I think it makes sense, and then, I'm not a huge fan of necessarily tying it to a revenue percentage or a percentage, but I like the idea of like, of course, I agree with the idea, of course, if we grow, then we have more money to give the same amount over to other things.
So actually, I kind of like the idea
But if we don't ever use it sometimes, like, well, what the hell's the
Well,
point?
you
so-
got to
so-
think of
there,
that,
you know?
making that like a goal, not a limit.
Sure.
So I think we could maybe say our goal is to donate this much or contribute this much. We might not, we might do more, we might do less,
Budget.
but this is our goal, almost like a strategic plan type thing. It's a part of our, you know, part of our values are that we want to
So
do this much.
the other, and I want to publicly state this, because I probably didn't say it quite correctly or should have. Yes, we've grown from a $3 million company to a $10 million company. But at the same time, we still have,
Sorry, not trying to make a racket.
no,
Water frozen.
our revenues, I mean, we all of a sudden, we don't have, I mean, everybody thinks that
Yeah,
low light power
our
is.
net income.
That we
Yeah.
just have
Yeah.
unlimited amount of money
Yeah.
to
Which is
spend.
why it sometimes makes sense
Yeah,
not to
so-
grow it
Right.
as a percentage, because
Obviously.
our net income is, we gotta keep, I mean, that's, our aim is for that to be positive but low anyways.
Right.
We should be reinvesting in the system.
I kind of assumed it might be tied to something different than revenue, but that was part of it.
So I guess,
So we
so
did our
one,
annual budget consideration,
Well-
it's kind of a good time to go
Yeah.
like, hey, last year electrical went way down, prices went way up, things are wacky, maybe we don't wanna, you know,
I would also ask, is $5,000 or wherever we're gonna be, is that the $5,000 we wanna focus on in any financial condition? You know, when our power supply bills on a weekly basis fluctuate on the high end, they can fluctuate $90,000 a week.
That's what I think.
Is that, you go back to that, you start making think about the minimums, so I guess a question would be, you know, for a language, should we just, to your point, on an annual basis, during the budget process, general manager will propose a benevolence budget that includes in-kind and financial support to be action, and it's part of that budget process. That's what it is. And then you've got you're not tying it to anything except for the budget process.
yeah.
And that's when it matters the most.
Yeah.
Right, you
Yeah.
just say not to exceed amount, and then hit that off too, so you'll never exceed
And then
it.
we can update the language to say, the board
And it's
reserves
a
the right
budget,
to do whatever
right?
they want to
I
do.
say it's a budget, so it's like if we say, hey, it's 5,000 this year, but something comes up and we're like, well, let's go to 7.
It gives me an
We're
opportunity.
doing better than we expected, we have the money to do it, that project makes sense, let's give extra money to these things. We're
And
not
it's,
so like,
we
we
do the
didn't
same
just
thing.
violate our policy because it's set at a solid
Yeah,
5,000.
I mean, we do the same thing with wood chippers and other stuff, right? It's just,
well, I was gonna say, we're
there's
talking.
opportunities here, we can change what we were planning.
Yeah, and so I think, and that gives me guidance on when to involve the board.
Yeah,
When do you know, if we're gonna bump up, because I still think you put limits on what you financially support to one organization. I
Yes.
like the $1,000 in financial support to an individual organization, or whatever that number is, because
yeah, maybe it's like 20% of whatever we said of the budget or
Yeah,
something like that,
20%.
it's relative
Or what's
to.
whatever the general manager's authority is, right? We tie it to.
I wouldn't do that, because I got authority to spend $25,000.
Well, I mean, so, like, percentage, what's that mean, though? Percentage of that, right?
I'm just kidding. So I think we could do that, but it gives me, there's parameters on in-kind of work hours. I like that, and at that point, it's, hey, and what I'll honestly do is look at how many hours we put into the chamber. That should be a relatively consistent
Right.
number of hours, and that's probably the most significant thing we do. And then I'll look at
Take
Pinkaro.
care of it.
They're good benchmarks, those are two,
I think there's things we
Event
all,
driven
I think
and
we all
year-round
agree
driven,
to be.
I was gonna say, I've not
We all
heard,
wanna do,
Yeah.
so it's like if we're doing those, then that's a good place to start.
let's
is-
benchmark. Because if there was something new that came about that was gonna be more demanding than the banner work, I'd probably feel better getting board support.
Mhm.
For one, you all need to know about it at that point. If it's gonna be more substantial, then it's gonna be a very visible thing. And the board needs to be aware of anything visible. So it kind of creates we use that to create parameters on work hours. We can do financial support as, budgeted number, separate, or we can budget the whole thing together, but carve out a specific piece for financial support. Make, 20% of financial support, no more than 20% of the financial support can go to one entity in an annual, a calendar year, or a fiscal year without board approval.
Yeah, because it gives us like.
Gives me some
Because
authority,
at the
but
end of the
gives
year, we've given out
guardrails.
0 of the 5,000 and someone comes along and then we're stuck at this,
And-
we can't go 1,200, like, without like violating policy, kind of
And
makes
by
sense.
supporting them, you guys are saving them a lot of money to go out and hire somebody
Oh.
to hang those banners. For what you
Yeah.
guys put into
Yeah.
it, it's saving them a lot, so it's not just what you say them, it's the whole thing.
Didn't I ask, there's not really a company that you could call and hire and be
I'm
like,
sure you could,
Yes.
but it's
From
not.
your ladder.
I offered.
Step ladder, Jim, at your service.
So this is a little bit of a change of topic, but I want to get board, no official board action, but want to make sure the board's comfortable with the way I want to communicate something, which I'm sure you will, but. The chamber actually, with Liz retiring and Shannon coming on board, they've actually already sent me their benevolence request for next fiscal year for the banner work. Said, pause for a month so we can have a conversation. Is the board comfortable with me telling Shannon there's no need to submit a formal benevolence request for the banner work? We are committed to doing it next year, and we'll continue for, I won't say anything beyond that, but to that request, are you comfortable with me saying we're granting your request, we're doing it? Because she's planning on coming next month.
I think the thing is, you want to give you the
Yeah.
leeway to say yes to that without.
Yes, but I'm saying, that's, it's gonna take, I don't know if,
Sure.
she was
okay.
planning on
Yeah,
coming next
yeah, yeah.
month. And I just don't wanna get presumptuous, I catch the tone of the conversation, but I would hate for me to say, well, policy's not in place, but I've acted on a hypothetical future policy. That's not what I wanna do by any means. But I also don't wanna tell her, hey, by the way, you can come, you come in
Wait 2
May.
months.
Yeah, come in
Why are you
May.
coming off?
Yeah, exactly. Come in May, and you can listen, depending on the order of the conversation, we may actually take a vote, we may not take a vote. Halfway through the meeting, I may have authority, halfway through the meeting, I just don't want to waste her time. I like the idea of having her come in and talk to the board, because I think it's important, so I want to invite her in,
Yeah.
but not necessarily in a benevolence with our hand out type of more just a, hey, we work very closely together with the chamber.
Yeah.
Come have a presence in our meeting, say hi,
Yeah.
you're new to the position.
Extend the olive branch.
Yep, she's gonna come to our showboat committee too, to talk about Santa and being on it and stuff like that too.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right, I think I've got feedback. I can redline something and propose it next month.
Thank you.
Oh, that was action items.
Yay. Are we done then? We're closing?
Comments?
Or
We're gone. So I will roll pretty quickly through
That's where we are.
informational items.
Or this is more common for us, I wasn't.
Yeah, we're comments right now. But when you look at performance data, again, very similar last month, very similar to a lot of, since the sales overall continue to be flat, if not a little under last year, and the volumetric, like your residential is under last year. Industrial is significantly under, or it's under last year. Consumers, or commercial is slightly over, but, overall our sales are down this year, but our revenues are up. That's largely weather driven, but from a sales standpoint, from a revenue standpoint, it's very much attributed to the cost of power. PCA is a significant bill component, and we obviously took rate action that went into effect in January, so we're seeing some of kind of the pulling together of the PCA and the rate action that was necessary to stabilize financials that was taken in January. So very much a similar story as the last few months. Sales are down, revenues up, weather and PCA and rate action.
That's decent news to me.
I don't know what, I'm happy to dive into the granular level, but that's the big picture on this one.
Speaking of big picture, I think I've mentioned this before, but it'd be nice to get this into a chart so you don't present all the data. It's gonna be more useful, and I know it's gonna take someone some time at some point, but just in the back of your mind.
Figuring out what information, how to.
Well, we've got tables right there already,
I'm
so.
saying, the data's there, it's just a matter of how you make it not too busy. Graphs get busy and lose
Pie charts
They can be.
Well, let's-
Pie charts you don't want to use usually.
Yeah.
They represent singular values as an area, which is two-dimensional.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's
solid. I like it.
but, just something to keep in mind. It's going to be more useful to us. Right now we're seeing 1 month compared to another month, 1 year compared to another year.
It's probably
What
hard.
we're going to see as like the previous 12 months. And, it's just a matter of picking. Yeah, I'd probably just say the top 3 rows of each area is really all we need or something,
Probably more than one graph. It's probably,
Yeah,
I think we can break it up into 2 graphs, because I like the average bill, average sale is good, but trying to put that on the same, you need too many different.
Those could just be their own little
Yeah.
rectangle text at the bottom or something if we needed, or.
Because what we run into a lot, and I've asked Megan to help develop some additional charts, is the scale. When you're trying to compare
Yeah.
$93 to $245, and we've done it and tried to put secondary axis, and some of it works, but a lot of times you lose relative nature because there's,
Yeah.
and we tried to do it with some of the budget items. But
Or we
when you
just
look
have
at,
it residential, commercial, industrial, 3 charts.
yeah, but even at that, you lose some, but just because the numbers are so, example is, we tried to create some graphs with budgeting, but everything is so incredibly small compared to $5.2 million. Even when you put a secondary axis, then it misrepresents. You've got one for one thing and then an axis for everything else, but when you're looking at $50,000 budget item next to a 4.5 or
Again, what are you
5.2.
using it for, right? We're not using it to compare one scale to another. It's like we're just using, like in this case, personally, I use this to see trends, right? It's interesting to me that our customer count goes up, our kilowatt hours goes down, and the dollars goes up, right? Which what you just explained after all that was that, well, we had the rate adjustments and we had, it's like, okay, cool, so we have more customers using less energy, you know, but the energy's costing more. And that's
I liked it.
That's the trend, that, those are the things I like to see, but it's just, I have to, when I only can see it 1 month at a time, it's like, it's interesting that we're comparing April, or March, I guess, whatever it is, to the previous year, but the part that's more interesting is just seeing like a trend of, hey, look at that, our sales of kilowatt hours are actually trending down or trending up.
And as a board, that's what we're looking at is trends, we aren't looking at, yeah.
Yeah, I
For 1
mean,
month and then next month we go back down to 7?
It's on.
Oh, it is.
yeah, I mean, and even here, it's like, to me, I don't know why we even have decimal points on the percentages, you know, it's like, that's, if the board cares about 0.01 versus 0.07 in some percentage, I mean, we're too far in the details.
I'll be honest, that's a pretty major overhaul, but I like the ideas.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
mean-
really about giving the board the information that you all need in a manner that helps you understand where we're at, understand where we're going, where we've been, and help you make informed decisions. So I may ask to work with you a little bit offline to say, hey, mark this up, because I'm more of an Excel person. Graphs, I get lost. I've got to decipher a graph. I think our brains work a little different, which is fun, and I know my brain works different than a rocket scientist. But yeah.
Well, what got me thinking about that was that chart you made of the Michigan map with the dots. I mean, you saw how useful that was for a driving discussion. If you guys had put that in a table like this, it wouldn't have had nearly the useful discussion we had.
No, I absolutely agree. That's what I told him. I said, we could put this one slide up here and talk for a half hour.
And we did.
And we did, absolutely. It's funny because we had debates over what would come next.
Yeah.
I guess. But I like, and it's snapshot information. Like my picture, the picture of Michigan, I told him, I said, I want to develop something that if somebody asks you, where's our power come from? I get my tablet, obviously you don't carry your tablet with you, you're not always ready to talk like power, I'm sure.
So if you've got it up on our
but-
website somewhere.
But if it's there, hey, right, that means a lot. You say, hey, Bell River, or Campbell is 800 megawatts, we own this much, and it's in Mount Olive, what does that mean to somebody
Yeah.
you're trying to convey information quickly, so. But we'll work on this, and I'll shoot you some ideas and maybe some drafts, and we'll carve it up and see what happens.
Okay.
I'm not sure when it'll be, but we'll put it up, I'm gonna add it to this other list right.
When will it be, Julie?
That'll probably be more a Megan thing.
Oh,
Don't add it to my plate.
I was gonna say, we're, workload is, in the office, the delays in time of use created a major backlog. We were hoping to have time of use up and running over a year ago. But I think this is important, this is valuable information, and let's see what we can work on.
Thank you.
All right, cost per kilowatt hour, again, more of the same. Unfortunately, we're seeing, you can really see when the PCA, we made the changes and modernized the PCA calculation was really gonna get implemented, and it coincided with significant cost increase on the power supply side. So we've seen a pretty substantial upward trend in effective rates, but that is largely driven by the PCA. It's not a coincidence that the average cost of the kilowatt hour follows a very similar dot plot, or not dot plot, but a graph or line trend as over cost per kilowatt hour. So, moving on to the next one. This one is good news. I like this chart. We're finally seeing the cash rebound, which obviously we talked a lot over the last year about erosion of cash, and we've seen the alignment, and I don't want this this is not going to be a continued trend, I don't think. If it is, then I would be surprised, but this is a product of alignment of the PCA has a historical lag where so we're collecting for the oldest 6 months in the 8-month look back. So it's a 6-month window, but there's a 2-month lag in it. So we're recovering a lot of the lost cash. We also trimmed our capital budget quite a bit in response to every month before these last two. So combination of trimming the capital budget, alignment of PCA, cost recovery from lost cash or cash erosion over the last year, aligned with relatively stable market prices right now and relatively stable power supply bills. That will change next month. And some of it's a timing issue. We're paying for some bilateral contracts right now, but we won't see the saving, but due to some units being shut down, but there's a lag in when we pay for the fuel for those units. So we're kind of paying twice now. We're paying for fuel in those units for 2 months ago, but we're also paying for bilaterals right now. We'll make up some, but not all, because our bilaterals are more expensive than what what it's replacing. But in a couple months, we'll make back some of that when we don't have to pay for the fuel that's not being consumed right now. So some of it's just a timing issue, and it happens every spring with the spring outages that Casey was talking about earlier. The big baseload resources take a spring outage. We don't burn any fuel then, but we have to make up for it in bilaterals. Then the fuel bill comes 2 months later, so.
Question, and I think you've touched on it before, but vehicle replacement fund. That's the the bottom, right?
No. Bottom is Fifth Third Investments.
Okay,
That's over $1 million. Those are, I believe, yeah, those are Fifth Third Investments. The equipment replacement fund is that one right there, I believe.
okay.
I believe. There's a lot of blues on this, I'll be honest. This is one that I don't look at the graph, I look at the,
And, I mean, to read it, I mean,
I think it's an order.
it's, from left to right, and then left to right, and left to right is the, yeah. First line is the first three. The second line is the second three. And the third
That's fine.
line is the third three,
It's
the
just-
top.
I
So,
said,
bottom to top, basically.
when I review this, I look at the picture and go, that's a pretty picture. I want to see the numbers behind it.
It just reminds me.
So I go to the spreadsheet.
At the bottom,
It just reminds me
not
of-
liquid, and the top is liquid.
So is the loan to the DDA paid back then?
Yeah.
The one from DDA is completely gone,
Okay.
yes. Yes,
Notice it was gone.
that was budgeted and paid off at
August?
the beginning of the fiscal year, yes. I made
That's what I thought.
2 years worth of payments, I believe, or maybe 3, I don't remember how quick they expedited it. But yes, paid off, loan is satisfied in full.
Are we, so, we've kind of pulled back because of some other costs on what we're contributing to the equipment replacement fund?
We have continued to fund the equipment replacement fund at this point.
I just, because we're a year, 2 years away from the new truck?
3. It's a big purchase, and I've toyed with the idea of exploring debt, because I struggle to hoard this cash when we're not, I hesitate to continue to fund something that's not gonna come to fruition for 3 years, to forego an investment right now. But there's so much uncertainty in the interest rate environment that I'm not sure we're gonna get to 2026 when we potentially need debt and go, yeah, that's a good funding mechanism for that truck. Cause I looked at, toyed with the idea of looking at a 3-year IPA or something, a small loan, but the cost of
of lending right now is so high that I think we're better off investing that money right now at 4.5% and letting it grow a little bit than worrying about debt, but
I mean,
I'm curious how I'd be interested to see how we're able to continue we paused very short term on some capital investments, and it was only about a 6-month delay to shift the contract labor over into, but a lot of that was, our budget this year just didn't support it because the cost of the labor went through the roof, so we could have potentially bled off the entire equipment replacement fund to keep that in the year. I thought it was a better move to balance the two and push the contract work out about another 3 months, because they were looking at spring this year to do it anyways. Now we're gonna start hopefully start this fall, so maybe a 6-month delay. I thought it was better to take a 6-month delay on that and be prepared for a truck with uncertain interest rates at the time debt would be needed. So we continued to fund it, and I think with the rate action we've taken, we can continue to fund the capital budget on an annual basis to the point, and continue to fund the equipment replacement fund. I think if we'd have bled that off, it would have just been a temporary solution to a temporary problem. All right, not much to say here, except for it's always a good story. I will say from an aging analysis standpoint, remind the board that April is the last month that the disconnect moratorium is in place, since we opt out of, I forget, PA 95, I don't remember what it is, the LEAF program, low income program. So this Friday we will be tagging, and next Monday we'll be resuming disconnects. And every year the girls in the office work very hard to manage this, and I think from what I'm hearing, there's not too much heartburn over coming out of the moratorium this year. If you'd asked Julie about a month ago, heartburn might have been a little more significant, but
People come through, so,
yeah.
okay, well.
it continues, and just because somebody builds up a bigger debt through the moratorium doesn't mean that equates to a write-off either. So I would say that we'll know more next Monday, but I think we're going to go through another year without a significant impact in not participating in the LEAF program. So, and I think it's also important to note that just because we don't participate doesn't mean that our customers don't have access to assistance funds. The office staff does an amazing job putting people in touch with the state, the Salvation, I don't know who all they are. They've got a whole list of resources that goes out in the disconnect letter.
Yeah, the shut-off letter.
Shut-off letter, I couldn't remember the shut-off letter or the tag, but yeah, anybody that's getting in jeopardy of reaching that delinquent point of disconnect, then there's still access to funds. And we've actually expanded, about a year ago, we went to the Michigan program. We opted into a Michigan program that has been used quite a few times now, hasn't it? 3 or 4 at least?
I think only one.
Only one? I thought there was
I
another one
think
coming
there
through.
was 2 or 3 people that applied.
But it's still, there's still,
Only one.
yeah. I just want to make sure the board doesn't think that, hey, we don't, or the public doesn't think that just because we don't participate in this, our customers don't have access to assistance, because
You guys said that.
they absolutely do.
How many have sent out what?
No, this is that.
Shut-off letters? On average, like 220 a month.
220?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then we tag about 80, 100. So they have 10 days, and 10 days, I have one pay. Then we tag, and then
And by the time it comes to shut off, almost nobody gets shut off.
Nobody gets shut off.
Almost nobody.
Almost no one.
And
Sometimes.
if they do get shut off,
They're usually back on.
they're usually very quick to get
Yeah.
back on, and
Mhm.
they did, I give the office staff tremendous credit for working with the customers and having the patience that they do, because sometimes you gotta play case manager, social worker, lawyer, financial advisor. I mean, trying to weed through some of the stories, and it's a challenge. It's absolutely a challenge, but they do a great job, and they work with our customers better.
Have you ever felt threatened?
We've been receiving some threatening emails from us as an individual.
And what do you do with those? Do you contact our local police department?
We press,
We have forwarded them to Charlie, I believe.
there's there's no physical violence. It's just, let's talk about this specific one offline. I don't think it's probably best.
Yeah, okay.
I think there's things I just want to be able to say without saying in a public meeting.
I'm just,
But yeah, we actually recently had to get the Lowell Police Department involved with an issue of a customer making threatening gestures to our crew, and we reported it to chief first, and the police department did a great job responding. So it's hard for it to go anywhere. But
today's atmosphere,
absolutely.
I think we try to work with most people, you know, if they have a concern, they work with us, if they understand why we're in this position, then we work with them. If they wait to get shut off is when, that's when you're shut off.
If they don't put an effort into it,
Yes.
because we talked about it a couple months ago. There's a bill, there's a shut-off letter, there's door tags, there's phone calls, there's emails. I mean, there's typically, I don't know, on average, how many points of contact there is between, or attempted points of contact between, that have to happen before they're disconnected. I mean, it's 6 or 7 times. When they don't respond to any of those, it can be very much a challenge. And that's the ones that usually get more vocal and don't like to tell the whole story of, how, they don't tell the story of how they got to that point.
Do we have in any of the letters, it will be so much easier for you to contact us early on. I mean, do we have that kind of verbiage anywhere?
To be honest, I'm not sure.
Yeah, the letter states, you have 10 days to contact us from the date of the letter. So typically we mail it out on the 1st of the month. And so you have 10 days, and right in the letter, it states, how to contact us, and we have 10 days. And then it states that a payment arrangement can be made. Give us a call. It definitely mentions that. It just then states you can't make one after you did it. Yes.
Yeah, I just, if you just kind of state the obvious, the more you engage with us, the easier this will be.
We say that a lot.
Okay.
Like, I talked to a customer 2 weeks ago, and I told her, I understand what situation you're in, but don't leave us in the dark. Don't not call us back. Don't, all the communication you have with anyone, from or your church or whoever you have, please call us and tell us. We try to reach out to you. If we don't hear from you, we think you're avoiding us and we have to shut you off.
Right.
So keep calling us. Each week, just call us and say, I've heard nothing. Okay, we'll give you another week. I mean, or we do ask people can you pay anything? Can you give up good faith? Can you pay $5? Can you pay $10? Can you pay anything? Can you borrow from your neighbor until whatever, next month when you get your payment, and then you can pay your neighbor back? Because you've already extended enough with us. So we do work and we do all sorts of things with people. Yeah.
Oh, it's gonna be an interesting, Monday is always the first day back, which last year was extremely uneventful.
Mm-hmm.
But
It was.
it will, we're hope for that, but we're gonna prepare for a little more, activity.
Yeah. It could be some.
All right, delinquent balances, again, more of the same. Electric requirements, same as, just informational items, paperless billing, auto pay. I'm still, and we saw the paperless billing plateau a little bit, but there's still growth across the board. Can't say enough positive things about the work and the effort that's been put into making this a great product for our customers that's utilized. PCA revenue, again, that graph shape follows pretty close to the average kilowatt hour type, that graph, but we did see some downward pressure last month, but that PCA is still hovering over a penny. We'd really like to see that drop down well under a penny. Love to see it get back down to about half a penny, but based on the latest projections from MPPA, we're not going to get a whole lot of opportunities for downward pressure this year. And into future years, there's going to be continued upward pressure on the PCA, and we may need to at some point recalibrate some rates and adjust the base power cost assumption in our rates so we can reset the PCA. If the PCA consistently stays well over a penny, is the guidance that I've been talked to UFS about, is when it consistently stays over a penny, you may want to take a look at readjusting how your rates are calculated. Be no more money in our pockets, no more take-home money, no more net revenue, but it would just kind of carve it up and rebalance things. And that's that. We'll go on to the monthly outage report. Ryan was not able to join us, and Ryan probably will not be joining board meetings for the next few months, just due to trying to avoid being around some people, not you all, but just minimizing human contacts and bigger groups. So I told him I would happily cover this. They'll get I said they'll get much less information, but we had one outage. It was a squirrel.
Wait a minute, was it a red squirrel or was it a brown?
We didn't get a picture.
I got no good pictures.
That's what we got.
That's what I said. Like we were talking Tuesday morning. Today. Oh yeah. Jeez. Tuesday. At our Monday morning meeting on Tuesday this week, and Ryan, what can you tell me? One outage. It was a squirrel.
Yep, that's what we got.
Perfect.
Okay, squirrel.
One less squirrel in the world.
So did we have any issues with the water?
No. So that is something. So I was. Water came up. The city manager Mike Burns reached out to me last Wednesday as they were making preparations. I was out of town, but got in touch with Ryan. Ryan was occupied as well, but we ended up sending representation to the meeting, and just wanted to, I think Mark ended up going. I talked to him Thursday morning before the meeting and told him that, we just want to be there, be available to support. Obviously, if there's electrical needs, those are our priorities, but if we can assist in the flood efforts at all, we're happy to participate, and ultimately did not end up needing to do anything. Some things did come to light, not come to light, but Ryan wants to make some minor adjustments down at the township park and make sure there's some equipment that water raises up on it. It's no big deal. I mean, it's really not a big deal at all. He was explaining everything to me, but the concern is potential driftwood.
Yeah.
Smacking some. So he's talking about putting some bumper poles up around some stuff that would guide river debris around that one piece of equipment. But I asked him about the unit over by the wastewater treatment plant, kind of over by the barns. There's some equipment elevated. Nothing came close to that. So overall, we were in good shape. But yeah, we ended up having no real involvement, and I think the city really avoided most of it. Shut down Jackson Street for a day and a half, and water started receding, so.
Yeah, we did,
It wasn't a record flood.
yeah, it was a record.
It's like
We had to
70
put,
years.
one year, we put, Timpson's brought in barriers that went along Hudson, and then they sandbagged all that, and we were making sandbags here. The public brought in sand, and there's nothing compared to that. Because otherwise, it was this close to Hudson being closed that one year.
Yeah, well, they were about to shut down the east side because of whatever we had on the river rock that we since moved.
Right.
It's what to go underwater.
So that's outage report. What else we have? Moving on to income statement, I'm just gonna highlight big picture stuff. Good news, again. I hate to say how we had, what it took to get to here, but another very positive net income. Again, a lot of that is timing driven. As we report on the income statement as bills are paid, where really financials are accrual-based accounting, so we do some adjustments, but yeah, another great positive net income this month. Brought our year-to-date net income ahead of last year and ahead of budget. It's been a long time since I've been able to say there's a positive net income. There's still not, or a significant positive net income. There's still not much positive to say about purchase power expenses compared to budget. We're still over 10% over budget. But the last 2 months have definitely helped that, because this month and last month, current month actually came in under the budget for the month. So we're trending, power supply stabilized briefly. There's no anticipation that it stays that way. Natural gas prices are down through the end of the year, and that largely impacts a lot of power supply costs. So hopefully we can keep some relatively low power costs. I can say the projections for the summer are, our August projection is the highest single month power supply that we would have ever had, so that's being projected. We'll cross that bridge when it comes to it, but overall, we've made the adjustments that were necessary to get us on this track. I'd also say 2 months of being on the right track are not a guarantee that month 3 will continue to go that way, or month 4, but this is the product of taking the steps that the board's taken over the last year to ensure our financial viability. So never was really in jeopardy, but we were on a trend that was not a sustainable trend that needed to just make some adjustments in response to the conditions that are imposed on us, so.
Sure, you got 2.5 months left of this budget, is that what it is? For this year?
3 months.
3 months?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we'll be April, May, and June.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so that's income. Capital budgets, again, the only thing I'll highlight is I asked Megan to add, go to the second one, please, Julie. That one, I just asked Megan to add in that current month spend, just so the board is, sees more on a granular level. I cannot answer the question of what $56 was spent on the facilities. I'm not sure, but
You're gonna do a pop quiz on that.
I was gonna say, somebody's gonna ask me, what's that $56? I don't know, I'll be honest.
Rounding error.
Right there.
Material. Move on.
But that's no issue. We really are not making giant strides in anything at this point. We are working, and we're gonna actually end up exceeding the budget on system improvements carryover from last year. We're just now able to wrap up Stony Bluff, and that was the carryover work, and so there will be more that hits next month, and I'm sure it's gonna exceed that remaining amount. There ended up being far more of that project left than we anticipated when we originally got into the budget. We're kind of counting on being a little further along in that project and having less to wrap up, but we are substantially complete with that project at this point, outside of data and services. Moving on to the manager's report. Again, not much to report on MPPA and MMEA. And actually, I was wrong about MMEA. MMEA is not this week. We go to, later in the month, we go to a state legislative rally that our lobbying firm, Carew, puts on. And we always do a short MMEA board meeting in person after the legislative lunch with in Lansing. So that meeting will actually be later in the month. Ryan's provided the distribution update. Again, I really like him providing this. He definitely provides more detail and better insight than I could into the day-to-day operations. One thing I want to highlight is he talks about Stony Bluff and in the equipment update using but we're using the Grand Haven wire puller to already did to pull in the rest of the there it is. I know it's in the equipment update. I knew it was in there somewhere, right? But we actually finished and borrowed Grand Haven's wire pulling machine last week and finished pulling in all of the major conductor in Stony Bluff Phase 4. So that's a good thing to have knocked out, and definitely appreciate Grand Haven's willingness to support our efforts, and we had some long pulls that need to be in there. Also want to bring attention to the noteworthy items. This is going to be really neat when it happens. What's that?
It's a picture.
Oh, we definitely will. I've got pictures we've got plans, the picture of the truck. So ITC is bringing in a massive transformer. It actually, I don't remember how many, every axle on the trailer is steerable. And it's such a big load that there's a truck in the front pulling and a truck in the back pushing the trailer. It's going to shut.
Send that to us, I can try to find that picture. Did Casey send it or Ryan send it?
Ryan probably
I'll look
did.
while you talk.
It's going to shut the town down. I mean, there's not.
You're looking on the screen though too.
Meg, or Julie,
Your
email's up.
okay.
All right.
We're just checking what.
I didn't have
what you
anything-
got going.
Got a lot of unread emails. But it's a major project.
When's that gonna happen? When's that gonna show
We
up?
don't know.
Okay.
But it's ultimately gonna go from, it's being unloaded here because they're gonna use King Milling's rail. Cause they're gonna rail it in and then they're gonna walk it over
To where?
to a trailer, and then they're gonna drive it out of town east, and ultimately it will turn, I can't think of the dang road now. It'll head out between here and Ada and turn north, and I can't think of the dang road. I looked at it and went, there's no way this truck's getting up this back road.
You're talking probably, it's gonna go up Settlewood to Parnell.
So
That's one Parnell, and then Parnell goes up to 2 mile.
Yeah.
So they're heading, I just wanna let you know,
They're heading west.
they're heading west, not east. I'm going, well, the hell.
For 8 years, I lived on the east side of Paris,
Okay,
and everything happened on the east side of town. I know my cardinal directions, I swear. My dad would kill me.
You'll be able to give us a heads up like the day before, or just while it's happening, or?
To be honest, I'm not real sure.
so that,
I mean, they're gonna have to give us pretty good notice because we have to assist. So we're gonna be involved. Our guys are gonna have to go and follow the truck and lift lines. Cause I think to be on the road, you can only be 13 and a half feet maybe. You know, Perry? Max height, oh yeah. Will you zoom out? a little bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to flip it.
Rotate it, right there you go.
Yeah, you won't, yeah.
Doesn't like me to rotate.
Go to view at the top, up in the top and hit, I think if you go from there and hit rotate counterclockwise, it works.
Rotate view.
Rotate view and then rotate, yeah, the other, oh, that'll work too.
One more.
But you just do it a couple more times. One more.
One more. I take the hardest route.
Yeah, so this is how big the truck is gonna be. Well, for one, the load is,
139 feet.
yeah, and the transformer itself is 385,000.
Semi-truck,
How are they gonna turn?
semi-truck and trailer.
Every one of these wheels
I like it.
is steerable, is what I've been told.
Yeah, but turning up on Parnell right there, it's like, it's a straight hill. I mean, they picked it, I'm sure they know they can do it.
They picked a pretty.
It'd be real interesting to watch that.
I wanna know how loud, I wanna know how loud the trucks are, trying to generate enough power.
To go up that hill, yeah.
But I mean, that whole thing's 140 feet long.
Regular semi-trailer is 53 feet,
Yeah.
53.
plus the truck, you know, so double the size.
It's gonna be,
Yeah.
it's gonna be something that everybody stops and goes, well, they're not out of choice, because whole roads will be shut down.
Yeah, you're gonna be stopped.
384.
I mean, it's, the trailer itself's 9 foot 2 inches wide. And that, I don't know if the load's gonna hang, the transformer's gonna hang off the side, but still, it's gonna be,
So is it?
oh, width, it's gonna, the total load is, 10
5.7.
foot 9 inches wide.
Yeah,
And lanes are lit.
So what connects the the trucks, is it
the second truck you mean?
like the 18 foot gaps at the front and the back of the trailer, of the center trailer, what is it?
So what
Yeah, is
that,
it
so
bars?
that's
Yeah, it looks like a drawbar.
drawbar, so again, so that they
Sort of
can,
like
so the truck can go up and maneuver,
Oh, yeah.
the trailer can then
Yeah.
turn its wheels
Follow
and
the
continue, and then.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna learn a whole lot. I don't have answers to any of these questions. I've never seen something this big get moved from point A to point B.
I've seen big ones before sometimes, and with these big cantilever trailers, you know, that are just amazing.
so it'd be easier going up there, it's when they get to Parnell and 2 Mile, that'll be trickier yet.
Oh, when I saw that pictures, I thought, wow.
How many axles were on that?
11 team, I don't know.
More than 2, less than 90. I'm not sure.
11, 12 axles,
Oh, and the center one?
On the trailer itself,
yep,
15 big up.
12 plus, 12 times
Yeah.
4,
Like this.
48.
We have a truck and
Just
then-
on the trailer.
All on the trailer.
There's 40,
And then there's three on
there's
the-
40,000, there's $40,000 worth of tires.
I'd like to hear Haywood Banks think about this one.
Now, is so this company has got comes from Laverne, Minnesota,
I'll be honest, I know very little about,
Van Dyke Brothers Incorporated.
I know and this isn't for us, so the only reason we're even involved is not because
You have to raise them.
because we have to raise some lines.
Yeah.
And there's very, very minimal to have to actually do. There's, you know, Ryan's done a good job of cutting out a lot of road crossings and, you know, there's really not a ton. I think there's a couple services and a couple smaller, there's nothing substantial. It's not like we need to take a major outage on anything to drop a line. Which is, I've seen happen, you know, when you move structures usually. You move a house, something significant like that, you end up you end up having to drop lines to help move stuff, so.
Traffic lights gotta be moved probably, maybe? Who knows?
What would they say, 20 feet from clearance they want?
19.9. So yeah, pretty much. I'm not sure. I asked Ryan to what extent things would need to be moved, and he said there's very little, so. All right, so other than that, I want to highlight the OSHA 10 and OSHA 20 leadership class that we I joined all of the distribution department minus Ryan. He was not able to attend, but we spent 3 days in Portland, covering a whole host of transmission, distribution, OSHA, safety guidelines. That was our first venture into our partnership with Portland, and that I've got nothing but positive things to say about working with them. It was, we have the unique opportunity that all of our guys can be in Portland, and we're still only a half-hour response to an outage, which is where we essentially sit on the weekends. Takes somebody about a half hour, so it's not ideal to not have the guys on the system during the day, especially 3 days in a row. But safety is obviously the most important thing we'll do on any given day, and we need to be revamping our safety program. And I see a lot of value in partnering with Portland, from educational opportunities, from networking opportunities, to just sharing in financial costs of trying to bring a very comprehensive safety program to both of the utilities. So they're also a very safety focused utility. They do a great job, so excited to work with them. Other than that, I want to highlight the last month I gave an update on the grants, and everything was doom and gloom. We're not going to get anything. And all of a sudden the state, it highlights that the state is not real sure how to administer the state programs. And it's trouble with the IIJA in general. It's such a massive pool of money that they wrote provisions in there that require certain percentages of money to go to small providers. In Michigan, the only two non-small providers, the only two large providers are DTE and consumers. So there's a big pool of money that has to go to DTE and consumers. That's going to be 2 applications. And then there's a smaller pool of money that has to be split amongst all 40 munis and all the co-ops, and I don't know how many co-ops are in the state. So you start to see the challenge at the state level of just workload per dollar handed out. And so they asked us, with no quick turnaround, and Casey on spring break, and didn't have the full complement of a team, with about a 4 business day turnaround request for some pretty detailed financial documents. And we were able to just thank the staff and highlight how hard everybody worked to pull together and get MMEA what they needed. So we'll see what comes about it, but they're really collecting the information because they're trying to, from what I can gather, it's not been told to me, from what I can gather, they're trying to create a more formulaic approach for handing out money to so many more entities. But we've regularly heard at varying levels of government that the government at the federal level, government at state level, wants to hand out the most money to the fewest recipients. It's a workload thing. There's $7.5 million to split between the small providers, and I don't remember as a percentage how much that was. I want to say it's 25% of the state's money. So 75, so they're going to put 30 times more work into handing out 25% of the money. I don't think anybody was quite prepared for the administration of the IIJA. So we'll see. I'm optimistic. I'm more optimistic than I was last year, but the optimism's been a roller coaster for a year at this point. So we'll see. Time of use implementation has been moved, and I will be a time of use customer. And if anybody would like to be, one of the things that we're going to require of anybody going on time of use is just sending an email to the customer service email address that says, please put me on time of use. Because there's a 12-month requirement to stay on there, we want documentation across the board from all participants that yes, you did tell us. We made this change based on your instructions, and because you gave us those instructions, you need to stay on the rate for 12 months. So if any board member or any council member that's also a council liaison would like to sign up for time of use, or want to know
more about it, if it might be a good fit.
I'll ask Marty.
But please send an email and we'll dig into it. Couple other things, want to talk briefly about,
Has an EV charger.
Yeah.
You could be a good candidate.
who's that?
Cliff?
He's only got the bike.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it's probably a good fit for him, but I did talk to him, he said, I'll go on I'll do whatever.
Mhm.
Well, we're gonna ease into it, the goal is to, we're targeting EV drivers first, because that's where it really makes the most sense to, there was a lot of the, EVs necessitated, was a big driver in the need to go to a time of use rate, because we want to really send the appropriate price signals that encourage charging in underutilized hours, so we're not having to make infrastructure, we don't want to add to the peak, we want to fill in the valleys, so that's what this rate does, obviously. Bill Stuffer's gone out, it's gone into live. It's the culmination of a very long and frustrating process with our billing vendor, and Julie has carried just a monumental amount of water trying to keep this thing from flooding and burying us. Testing, working with the billing vendor, criticizing the billing vendor, motivating the billing vendor. Julie, the implementation of this and getting this to be an option for our customers, definitely the bulk of the heavy lifting was done by Julie.
Thank you.
So cannot stress that enough. I want to talk a little bit about trees on Bowes Road. We're going to be talking, I think, Perry, you're very aware of these through the Arbor Board, but there's a group of trees on Bowes Road between, kind of starting at the Stony Lakeside Park, heading west from there, the right direction. Heading west from there that go on the south side of Bowes Road in front of the water treatment plant. There's two different species. There's like a pear tree or something. Those are pretty short, they're not concerning, but there's also like a honey locust. And they're growing quickly. Brian was working with the Arbor Board. Some of that work kind of brought up some opportunity to look into the ordinances, look into what needs to happen, how to best support or adhere to guidelines that we've been provided from the city through ordinances, and balance that with the reliability of the system. Ultimately, I think City Council is going to be having some conversations. We're going to talk about it next Monday at the council meeting. But what we worked with the city. Ryan and I sat down with Dan and Mike to try and just, what can we be comfortable with moving forward? We want to have a plan in place before we chop the trees down, cut the trees down. I want to make sure there's plans in motion that adhere to city ordinances and also address the situational concerns that we need to be aware of down on Bowes Road. But I'll leave that at that. So what we ultimately landed on is we told this Mike and Dan that if we get into the growing season, some of those locust trees are going to shoot up really quick. You get those shoots that just shoot straight to the sky as soon as they're probably going to start this week. But we want to address the issue before it really becomes a reliability concern. So we looked at trimming them once, trying to give us a solution. Ryan went out and looked, and to trim them in a manner that would not encourage vertical growth,
Right.
it's going to look horrible. I mean, you really have to you can't shape it like a haircut. You've got to get down to, V's in the tree. You got to get to where you're not going to encourage that growth, and to do that, we're not real confident that the effort wouldn't be in vain and a waste of time and money trying to beautify something temporarily, when ultimately those trees mature between 40 and 70 feet and they can't stay there. So we all agreed that let's look at our policies, let's look at the city ordinance, We're gonna we already did make a contribution to the city's tree fund. The city's working with Williams and Works to update some plans and how to kind of really, how do you implement the ordinances that are on the books, and how do you make sure you're taking a holistic approach to tree removal in public space. So the plan is to talk at the second city council meeting in April, and then almost immediately following that conversation, go ahead and remove just the high priority trees. I believe there are 9 high priority trees, but there are actually 11 honey locusts. Well, a couple of them aren't necessarily a high priority, but we're going to go through and remove all the honey locusts. We also made a contribution for a couple trees that we needed to remove late last year that we had not implemented a replacement strategy at that point, but wanted to make sure that we did, so we incorporated those into the contribution to the city tree fund. The city matched our contribution to the tree fund, so it was a shared expense.
Are they planting the trees as fast as you're cutting them down?
No.
That's gotta be fixed immediately.
So the challenge that we have there is the ordinance, we can't.
You can't tell the city when to get.
I mean, I don't want to create this, hey, this is their problem, this is our problem piece, but the replacements typically are not in the same location, and I don't think that those plans are. So if the plan was to replace something in the same location, we could advise, but I think the plan will, and that's why they want to work with Williams and Works, is where's the best place to replant these? What species need to? They want to take a holistic approach, and we've never really had the city, to my understanding, Jim, you probably can provide more commentary than me, but there's never really been comprehensive guidelines on how to carry out the ordinance. What trees need to be planted? Where do they need to be planted? What's considered a tree? Nobody's ever defined what's considered a tree, and I think that's something that you've brought up, is if we take down a completely dead tree, is that something that needs to be replaced? If we take down something that's that big around, is that something that needs to be replaced? At what point does it? So there's just certain things that the city is planning to comprehensively address. And also, I think in general, from what I've been told, best time to plant stuff like that is a little later in the year, instead of planting it right before it gets hot, and then you have to
got all
worry.
summer water.
Yeah, then you have to worry about that. So I think but again, that's also something that I'm not an arborist or
Or the arbor board at Lowell, should we talk to about this?
So I'll let Perry talk, but we worked with the Arbor Board thinking that was the appropriate board to
Yes.
work through. And one of the things that came up through that was questions as to whether or not,
We even had the say to make a decision like that,
yeah.
which we do not.
It brought up there's been a lot of questions that have been brought up. Because ultimately, if we look back to why, and Perry can provide much better detail than me, but there's a need to implement some of these ordinances due to some practices that were happening in town. So some of the immediate needs, I think, were addressed through that, and some of this is speculation, but we don't remove a lot of trees. We trim a lot of trees. So it's not something that's regularly been, I guess, a topic at the forefront, but I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
So
Barry.
there was a stretch when the need to remove trees, the need to, on the east side of on Monroe, there was a bunch of trees that needed to be removed. Lowell Light and Power was taking the brunt of citizens not happy with the trees, and an employee went out and marked a couple trees that were gonna come down with smiley faces,
Oh,
which,
yeah.
again, so from that and from the Arbor Board was created, and it was created to help address and to have a comprehensive tree plan. Since going through this, and I know that there's in the ordinances of, and it was never really established, the amount to contribute, that if you were removing a tree on city property, on the city right of way, you were supposed to replace that. And again, it's not always, there's a lot, putting it in the right of ways, there's,
Put you back in harm. Is that
Well,
what you're thinking?
well, that, and not just that, but you have sewer, you have gas lines, you have water lines that are typically in the right of way. So again, in this situation, I think it's going to be more appropriate to figure out, maybe there's places in the parks or whatever that could use trees, so that
Yeah.
when a tree's being removed, that not necessarily putting a tree right in that specific place, but putting it in a more appropriate place.
Understandable.
The only thing that I would say to Jim, when they're, because I sit on, Jim and I both sit on the Arbor Board, and Jim Reagan, Dr. Reagan was the chairman of that, and he's talking with him, he's not feeling the need as much anymore, and we were looking to see if the Parks Commission would take over the Arbor Board, and they basically said no. They had no interest in adding to their agendas and going from there. So I don't know where that, where the city is
Well, I know we have a meeting on April 24th.
for it,
And at
right?
that time, I guess we can discuss it.
And the other is, you know, my biggest concern is that if the ordinance is there and if we or citizens or consumers energy or utility service, whoever is having to remove a tree or whatever, and it happened in front of the post office, they had to, Point Broadband, I think, had to replace a tree and different things, is, again, I just feel like the city needs to act in the same fashion as they're requiring other people to. And I say that because I can go on a list of trees that have recently been removed in the right-of-way from the direction of the city. And I know that a couple of the trees, Lowell Light and Power, was asked by the city to help because, again, the equipment that we have. But my question is, and I think I know the answer, but those trees that were removed by the request of the city, I don't believe that they have contributed to the tree fund for those that have been done. And I just, again, this is me personally, I just feel like the city needs to act in the same manner as they are requesting other people to do. So, and we'll find out as it goes. But again, to your point is, and looking at the map, again, it's kind of along the park there that these were planted. whereas I know in front of other people's houses that are in the right of way, you know, people, homeowners take more ownership of those. The only plus side is this is actually along the water treatment plant and the park there. So if we, my feeling is those trees that need to be removed there, I think they should come up with a comprehensive plan to replace those trees, but not in that area. Put them in another park, a park-like setting that will not interfere with, I mean, we've had the same thing, if you look at Rec Park, I mean, you know, I don't know, the city or whatever, planted trees right under the power lines that are going through Rec Park, you know, and you're going like, why are we planting trees underneath these power lines? And it's not just underneath them, it's certain distances, because when a tree in a high winds comes down, just because they're not directly under power lines, doesn't mean that there are policies that power lines have, different, and I think you've seen it, Ryan's had it, you know, different height of trees and everything, and not just only underneath the power lines, but it goes, as it's going out, there's certain trees that should not be planted in that.
Yeah, kind of a
Like,
diversity.
he brought that to our arbor boards.
And
We should plant.
But that's,
I'm not blaming the current administration of the city, but it's just that over the years, the city has not used those or have not implemented those policies.
Well, I do believe there should be a check and balance, and one person should not have all the authority to make that ruling, which states that he does have that power today.
yeah, so, and it brought up some challenges that we have in our own policy that I think we should probably look at. And we're gonna be taking a look at it and probably proposing some updates, but you can tell it was, our current policy is a product of the circumstances that, you know, we've been discussing. So there's probably some opportunities to align our policy with, and I think originally our policy tried to align with the city's council's ordinance, but yeah, there's some mismatch in the ordinance too, right now, between our policy and, you know, our policy says that the DPW director and the city manager have to approve what trees we take down, but the city ordinance gives me that authority. And I need to have that authority. You know, when it comes to, or the utility needs to have that authority on an operational level, it's what we do. I mean, nothing against any DPW director, but I'm gonna trust Ryan's judgment on what it takes to be reliable over, and again, not any reflection of Dan or any DPW director, but I know Ryan has more experience.
He's the industry expert.
Yeah, Ryan knows, and when I ask him, Ryan, what needs to happen? And why? Justify it. This, where, how do you cut? What's good practice in cutting? What's trimming guidelines? Where are we at? He's got answers. Is there somebody out there?
David just took my car.
Oh, all right. I started thinking that you're walking home, are ya?
He's putting gas in my car if he wants me to work.
All right, I'm gonna roll on. We still have a closed session to jump into after this, so it won't be a long
Yes,
one.
we do.
But I wanted to highlight, talk about brush cleanup. Mention in there that Ryan and I met with Mike and Dan, and we're working together to use the new chipper for a community brush cleanup day. It's actually gonna turn into a week, I think, but it's gonna be the first week in May. People are gonna drag their stuff to the curb, and we're
How big
gonna,
of stuff can we drive to the curb?
I don't
I
remember.
wanna know.
Ryan,
I got a few acres.
You got a few acres?
you guys, it's gonna be a one-ton deal, huh?
At your house all day.
It's just- The goal, so there's a lot of guidelines. I've seen them and I don't remember them off the top of my head, but yes, there's gonna be some size requirements. There's also gonna be, if it looks like if you're clearing trees, we're gonna leave it.
Yes. No fresh cuts.
Yeah, you know, if you just lay a 150-year-old oak tree out by the road,
No fresh cuts.
we're gonna,
It's gonna get a little bit.
brush cutters at your house. We may regret. G drives last.
Yeah, you just go right up to Nelson, it's subject to local blackout.
Or you see it out there, gas and a lighter. You think we can just burn this off?
Drag it to our neighbors.
But did want to highlight that. That'll be between now and the next board meeting. Want to highlight the events that are coming up this Saturday. We've got the Lineman Appreciation event at New Union that we do annually. Marty plays a huge role in organizing this, and Craig's been involved. Ton of fun. Very much appreciated. Told Marty last year and told him again today. Yeah, this is something that makes Lowell a great place.
And we might have to have the heater there.
We were just talking, we said we might get wet, but I don't think we're gonna need the heat.
I think they got that cookie thing going through town from 1 to 5 or something.
On Saturday.
It's,
Supposed to be
the weather's
wet.
supposed to be,
Not ideal.
It was cold last year.
Yeah, it was cold. Yeah, Perry went and got his torpedo heater.
Yeah,
Yeah.
only it rains, so this year.
Oh, no, it rained a little bit last
It
year.
did?
A little bit,
Yeah.
just a little bit,
Okay,
yeah.
well,
Wouldn't be a Lineman Appreciation event without a little bit of rain.
right.
Every event that we do.
Yeah.
When did this rain come about? I mean,
Saturday.
Yeah,
I know, but I mean-
possible snow.
because I thought, wow,
Oh, that's disappointing.
yeah. I guess I wasn't looking at the forecast far enough. Too recently.
So other than that, next Tuesday, is it Tuesday? Yes.
Yeah.
April 18th. We'll have just a lunch, kind of an internal lunch gathering. And be just a little good cookout. Everybody's obviously welcome. And then May 3rd, we have our first Adopt a Road event. So again, if anybody would like to participate, obviously in any of those, please join us. It'd be great. And that's all I really have for manager's report, I believe.
okay,
Well, there's scheduled meetings.
Oh, there's the map.
yeah, there's the map of,
Oh, the
Yeah,
trees.
that's plug in now.
Yeah.
Morning.
Thought I might, said I had 50 minutes, but
okay,
we have meetings all day.
I'm gonna change it up just a little bit. Board comments, and then we'll go to closed session. So, Tina?
Short and sweet, to Casey, bravo, that what he brought to the table. I requested from Julie I would like a printed copy of that because that was very cool and very informative. Ryan, gosh darn those rodents, and his input on the trees. Julie, thank you for being here so late and working with the billing vendor. Whatever you do, if you need any muscle, you get on the phone, you call me, because I know how those things.
I'll say,
They're scared of me.
when Julie says jump, they go, really? Okay. How high?
How many people can call me that day when I send
I'm
a
just
message?
letting you know, because I'll back you on
Yeah,
it.
they came around.
I'll say, they came around and we got a couple people involved and things started really moving at a much better pace.
They did.
We shouldn't have to complain about the pace though, to get results,
When we
but
back up, I'll come and sit next to you, we'll go through that system, and then we will bring out the big guns, verbally, so to say, because we're not playing with this type of system. And Charlie, thanks for being ours. Thank you. And the rest of the crew. That's it.
Daniel?
Ain't nothing.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think I say this for every training we get, but, thanks for doing the training to Casey and everyone else who helped with that. Clean it up, and I mentioned already, but I love that graphic you guys put together. That's as you mentioned, we got the half-hour discussion out of it. It was worthwhile. And also, I guess I also want to say just thanks for having food here every time. Because that's, doesn't seem like much, but when I spend all day at work and I get in the car and my right ear is red because I was on the phone all day on the little one-ear headset thing.
Yeah.
Didn't have time to eat anything except for a cheesesteak and some crackers, and it's just nice to be able to come here and say, hey, actually I can get some food and, and not pass out trying to think about charts and stuff. So, thank you. And that's all I've got.
Mr. Ponder.
Well, yeah, congratulations to getting, well, almost completely through, but the finish line is in sight.
True.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
congratulations. I got nothing else.
I want to correct Charlie on something he said earlier, and I think he cut himself short. I believe he could run Campbell 3 and make it work.
As long as there's a whole lot of other people
I
there.
believe that you could do it, make that plant run.
Thank you.
That's it.
Okay. Anything, Charlie?
No, unless you wanna talk about leap seconds.
No? And I don't have anything.
Yeah.
So I will, well, I do, but we'll talk.
Good luck, I can excuse myself because I just sat through one of these.
Would entertain a motion to go into closed session for union discussion.
A motion to go into closed session for the purpose of discussing labor negotiations.
Okay,
I'll support.
okay, will you do roll
I also
call?
gotta do a roll call. Chairman Beecham?
Yes.
Vice Chair Stroughman?
Yes.
Board Member Cadwalder?
Yeah.
Board Member Crawford?
Yes.
Board Member Founder?
Yep.
All right, we are
Officially in closed session. You're welcome.